Good evening. I would like to call to order this Anoka-Hennepin School Board meeting for today, October 28th, 2024. Please join the board in pledging our allegiance. All right, our first order of business is to approve the board agenda. Is there a motion to approve the board agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Simon. Is there a second? Thank you, Co-Chair DeShane. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the board agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, the agenda is approved. All right, members, the next item on our agenda is item 4, the consent agenda. As normal, members can remove items for separate consideration and discussion if that's their desire. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented? Is there a second? So is there any discussion? Maybe I should have said this first, actually. Maybe it's out of order. There's one item I wanted to pull off for separate consideration. It is, there's a lot of appendices. I believe it's Appendix H, the new middle school courses, just for separate consideration. So with that item removed for separate consideration, is there a motion to accept the rest of the consent agenda as is?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Simon. Is there a second to approve the rest of the consent agenda with that one item that we'll visit? Second, thank you. All right, hearing a second, will all in favor say aye? Aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, with 6 in favor and 0 opposed, the consent agenda minus that one item is approved. I had requested that we remove item H. I believe it was the new middle school courses. Sorry, I was getting a little confused because I think it might be listed differently in here. I had pulled it, so I'll just state what I was going to state about it. So what item H is, it's the new middle school courses. We had discussed this at a previous work session where it was the idea of having an alternative music class offered for a number of students and parents who had, requested, essentially not to participate in the ones that were offered, which is totally fine. The presentation given was great. I was in favor of it. There were good questions asked, but ultimately it did seem like a good idea. So the reason I mention it is because, at least for me, given that support that I just stated, for me to vote yes currently on these courses puts me in somewhat of an awkward position because it was recently brought up by a number of community members, students, parents, teachers, that there's some concern over math curriculum, the details of which are not going to be gone into right now. But suffice it to say, I had requested a solution at least be come up with, and at least for now, that hasn't happened. And what I realized when I was looking at this band curriculum, music curriculum idea, is it kind of is at least it would have been to me a workable solution or something comparable to it for the math curriculum as well. Kind of offer an alternative option that still meets state standards for the math students who are struggling in the existing course. But that's not what we're voting on. But the reason I mention that is because if I were to vote yes on this, it would kind of put me in the position where I feel like I'd be supporting at least what I interpret to be a double standard, which is we'll say, yes, we'll allow an opt-out option for one course, but we're not going to allow the same opt-out option or like an alternative instruction for a different course. So I'm actually like the idea for this. It's frustrating to me that I don't feel like I'm in a position where I can vote yes. But I do think to be consistent and to be fair, we have to provide the same opportunities for everybody, whether that's we find an alternative solution for the math kids and the music students, or neither for both. But consistency is important, just so I don't feel like I'm supporting a double standard. But I would just, in light of that, like to reiterate my request, since this was done, this idea was brought forward, with the good intention of trying to find a workable solution for a number of students and parents that had requested it. It's a good idea. I would just request that we do a similar thing for the math curriculum so that I can get on the same page and so that I can support this in the future if it passes or doesn't pass. But that's really all I wanted to say. That's where I'm at with it. Beyond that, does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Director DeShane?
Thank you, Co-Chair Arco. You said a couple things that I just want to address really quickly. So you said it's like an opt-out or alternate. That's not the case. So for music curriculum options, we have band, choir, orchestra, and this new one is a non-performance-based music curriculum. So it's not the same as an opt-out or an alternate. It's just an additional curricular offering. The way I would think about that in comparison to math, as you brought up, we have algebra, algebra 2, geometry, trigonometry, pre-calc, calc, statistics, etc. There's a lot of options for students who want to have choice. Some are prescribed, but some are also choice. And I think that's what's happening here with this music one. It's not really the same thing as an opt-out or an alternate. So I just wanted to share that perspective out as you're making your considerations. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Director Hochman?
Thank you, Co-Chair Arco. According to the testimony that we heard at the work session, there was a small number of parents, was the testimony that we heard, who were opting their students out of the course due to the performance requirement. And so this is a course that's being created to satisfy that need. And I strongly support parents' rights to opt out of courses and in every way influence the education of their children. So I think that's a good thing for parents to do. It's also per state statute that if parents choose to opt out of a course, then the school board is not required to pay for the cost of that alternate instruction. So this happens with many other courses, and we aren't, as the testimony said, a handful to perhaps 20 students. We're generally not making new courses to satisfy that demand. And at this time, when we're at such a financial impact or crossroads in our district, that's really the fourth thought of my consideration for this, is the cost associated with developing a new course. And we have many unanswered questions related to how will this affect the music program, what number of students will be taking it when added, are we adding courses equitably considering all parents' needs in this district to satisfy the education of their students? And just what will be the content of that class? None of those questions have yet been answered, so for those reasons right now, I have concerns.
Is there any other discussion from the board? Director Langenfeld?
Thank you, I appreciate that. As we think forward then, here's a course that has been brought forward to us, and I just need a point of clarification. I'm feeling it's conflated with something else, so I'm hearing Director Hochman speak to a course at a time, adding a course when we are all in a place right now with budget reductions. And then I'm hearing Director Arco talk about the fact that it's an opt-out situation and something to do with math. So just for clarification purposes, as we look at this course and think about it in terms of meeting the needs of kids as we move forward, my question to us is then, if we take it off this agenda and we don't support it, I apologize, but I don't know what happens next with this course and where it goes. So if someone could help me out with that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Assistant Superintendent Brodier is here to answer any questions you have. We did not receive any questions ahead of the meeting since the last work session, so we can answer those now if you'd like, if you have them. Because there is a distinction between a course that has started during a term and someone wants out of that course after this term has started versus a new course that you register for as a new option in a course offering course catalog offering. So I think there's some distinctions there to be made. So if it's the will of the board, we can try to answer some of those questions with Ms. Brodier.
Certainly would be helpful for me. I'd appreciate it if we could. I don't know if
Yeah,
others
for sure.
agree. Thank you.
I'll throw something out there real quick, just to clarify. My apologies if I misspoke. So I used the word opt-out. In a sense, that is true, but I don't think it was the right word choice here because they are opting out of like band and like choir, for example. It's more that they're finding a different modality to meet the same standards, and a new option, a new class is being offered to allow them to still meet the standards, but in a fundamentally different way, which is totally fine. Like, I support that. I think that's great. So the going back to my initial reason is this has nothing to do, generally speaking, with students opting out of one particular class mid-semester or trimester. That's not the concern. It has everything to do with the idea that an alternative option is at least considered for future remedy to the problem. And and the reason I bring it up is because I had requested at least some solution be considered, not adopted, of course. I'm only one board member. I can't unilaterally decide anything, nor should I be able to. But a request was put forward by me to at least come up with some solution. And the only answer I received was that we can't redo the whole math curriculum. Nothing, I did not recommend that, nor did I suggest that, nor did I think it would even happen. But just to give an example of kind of what I was thinking of, in the case, the band or this music class is the perfect example of this. We're coming up with a creative option to offer a different class and satisfy the standards. We could do the exact same thing with the math curriculum. We could have an alternative math class, like another geometry class that just emphasizes, for example, direct instruction more over the collaborative learning instruction. Not that the goal is to pick and choose one or the other. It's simply at least in my interpretation, there's been a critical mass of teachers, parents, students, and even myself that have raised concerns over this, that we should at least be considering a possible solution to it. And unfortunately, I just don't think that's happened or is even likely to happen, which is why like I said, I'm at a point where if I, as an individual board member, said yes to the music students, we're going to give you the alternative option, but all of the math people who are asking for the exact same thing, we're not going to consider your concern, I feel like I'd be in a position where I'd be supporting a double standard. So that's perhaps a better clarification. My apologies for any confusion. Go ahead with that, the Director Langenfeld's question, just so
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
I guess I was trying to understand if this is tabled at this time, is it something that can be brought back? And also, there are questions regarding costs now that may not have been addressed in the past that people are requesting. And then it sounds like there's another curriculum concern in math, which is not part of this. So I'm asking for clarity somewhere. I'm not sure what I'm asking in that regard because it seems kind of going in a variety of spaces. That's all. But
Okay.
in terms of the cost and bringing forward this particular course was, in fact, as Director Hoagland spoke to, the fact that people were seeking an alternative, and certainly, and I can certainly affirm that having been in the district serving as a middle school principal for many years, that in fact that was the case back in the day already, and now that there's some additional requirements around music, this lends itself to consideration. I would assume that's why it was brought forward.
Yes, thank you, Director Langenfeld. The course was brought forward in order to better meet the needs of all of our students. Unlike math, music requirement in sixth grade is unique to Anoka-Hennepin. Most districts don't have a music requirement. Anoka-Hennepin does. So we have 3 options that are performance-based, and music studies was brought forward in an effort to maintain a music requirement for all sixth graders, but give another option. I wasn't prepared for this conversation tonight, so I apologize. I don't have the exact costs in front of me, but because the equipment is there really isn't equipment as a non-performance-based course, the costs would be relatively low. I'm sorry, I don't have an exact number. We can get that back to you. I do think that this is, again, a unique requirement for Anoka-Hennepin. We have a long, rich history with music education and requiring that for all sixth graders. So this course was brought forward in an effort to better meet the needs of our families. Director Hoekman, you mentioned the handful to 20 students. I just want to clarify that's per school, depending on the community. So throughout our system, you know, we're talking about probably 100 families that have formally requested. While even though if they're not requesting, I would anticipate there might be other students that would prefer this method of music instruction. We don't have those exact numbers. Enrollment fluctuates from year to year, but giving families that option was the goal of bringing forward the request.
Thank you. Director Adet?
I think just a comment as I'm getting up to speed here. Seems like the issues with what you call the double standard of we are creating an additional class at the behest of some group of people, which again, doesn't altogether sound like a bad idea, though there have been other requests from groups of people to make alternative classes or different offerings that we haven't always done. So, I mean, to me, the point that I hear you making is if we're going to do that, we should do that, or we should not do that. But we should not have a double standard where we make a course in order to satisfy some group of people, and then we won't make a course in order to satisfy a group of people in all cases, which of course is going to be tricky, which I'll acknowledge, but it's at least, I get the point you're making. It's worth a discussion, and whether it's here or at another time, but I guess we're having it now.
Director Adet, I don't want to speak to the math question because I'm not familiar with that. We have over 400 courses in our secondary level, so we do just what you're saying. The process for new courses comes through department leaders. So this wasn't particularly just because families are requesting it, but the system was requesting it. So again, I don't want to, I can't speak to exactly what you're talking about with the math situation, but I agree that we want to make sure that we have a clear process for that recommendation, and I do believe this music class followed that process.
Yeah, I'm not speaking to the math at all. I'm simply saying, and I don't know the group. I asked actually, is there a specific group of people? I didn't really get an answer to that. It doesn't much matter to me. My point is, let's suppose somebody came forward with a religious exemption or otherwise. If they asked for additional coursework and I don't know if that's what we're doing here, but if it is, okay. It's a reasonable thing if members of our community need it. But that type of accommodation, that type of alternative course could be proposed in other scenarios too, and at least I've raised a number of issues that I might suggest we could do it for. Up until now, we haven't done it, so.
No, I don't have anything to add. The math issue is a completely different topic, so that would take further discussion, I think, at a more appropriate time. It's not on the agenda tonight. What's on the agenda is this course, so if the board doesn't feel comfortable passing it tonight, I think one of the questions was what happens next? What's the timeline? I know the window closes for any new courses, so maybe that timeline comes and goes without approval, so be it. The math issue is a different set of facts and really unrelated to this.
Thank you. The timeline for this particular course would probably be by the end of November in order for us to implement for the fall of '25 to include it into the registration guide.
So what I would recommend, board members, is it can be tabled until the next meeting. In between now and then, we can provide any additional information that the board may want and get some feeling whether there's board support moving forward with it at that point, knowing that we can still have the potential to get that added to the list of courses available. Is that possible?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it really isn't about math in particular. What I'm trying to drive at, yes, math is the particular example here, but is the idea that we have a block of students, let's say it's some number of students and parents who have asked for this, and rightfully so, we responded to them, and that's great. We should do that, which is why I'm generally actually in favor of this. But when the same request, I guess, as I had made a request for at least to have a solution considered, not even acted upon, not even a timeline given, but just a solution considered. Essentially, throughout the course of the conversation, the request was dismissed. So if it's just a numbers game, just boil it down to numbers. You have a lot of parents, we absolutely should not deny them. We should take their consideration seriously, but each individual board member represents something to the tune of like 40,000 residents in their area. So I think a request by any board member really should be taken seriously. And even if the consideration is eventually rejected by the board as a whole, which is totally fine, that's what the board is for, that's, I think, at the heart of the issue for me is if there's no mechanism through which at least me or the board as a whole can at least, not even in a public-facing board meeting, just request a solution to be had or considered, but this will just kind of happen on its own. Like, I don't think there's any one board member who asked that band be, or the music classes have a new class added to it, which again is fine, I have no problem with that. But it wasn't requested, it was done, that's great, now it's being considered, but when a board member, I guess, requested it, and then at least how I interpret what happened is my request was kind of dismissed. I don't feel like I can act in good faith to the people I was trying to represent when I say yes to one change, and then we're just going to disregard the request coming from a different block of people altogether, if that makes sense. So, either way, is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we will take a vote on whether or not to approve. It was appendix item H. Will all in favor? Or what's it?
I think we need to move and second it.
Sorry about that. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Simon. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Co-Chair DeShane. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Nay. With, I believe it was 4 in favor and 2 opposed. Did I hear that correctly? It does pass. So, thank you. Our next agenda item is item 5, the communications, delegations, and petitions section of our meeting. This is time for community members to provide input directly to the school board about issues that fall within the school board's authority. We plan this agenda item for 15 minutes. Our policy allows for community members to speak up for up to 5 minutes. But if there are several persons that want to speak, the chair has the discretion to reduce the time to comment, to hear from all, and also to keep the meeting on schedule. During times of large committee input, we have been flexible in allowing the meeting to run late. Tonight, we have 2 cards to keep the meeting on time. Individuals can have up to 5 minutes or more if they need it. And if you would like to comment, please complete a yellow card and provide it to Ms. Kofsky so that we can provide a written follow-up. A couple of procedural reminders. Our meeting participation procedures are in place to ensure open and orderly public comments, as well as to protect the due process and privacy rights of individuals under the law. If speakers use specific names of students, staff, or board members, I will need to interrupt and/or stop the speaker. Please remember to direct your comments to the school board chair, myself. Members of the audience, please listen respectfully. If the board cannot hear speakers, I may reset the timer to allow the speakers to be heard. Audience members that disrupt this portion may be asked to leave for the remainder of the meeting. And with all of those disclaimers being said, the first yellow card is from James and Amanda. My apologies for the mispronunciation of the last name. Jaden, perhaps? Oh, I got it. Look at that.
All right, sorry, we are new to this. Can you hear me? All right. My name is Amanda. My husband, James, and my son. Am I allowed to name his name? He's just here for Mason. Our family moved from Texas a couple years ago, and we chose Andover because we were wanting to be part of a community. That was a big motivator for us to change our family tree and make a big move. When we first moved here, we were in a rental location that we were supposed to go to Andover Elementary School. We opened enrolled because where we were gonna eventually live was in the Rum River Elementary School borders. We had a builder that was not very upfront with us about the zoning and which one we would go to. They just said, yep, you're part of Andover, you know, you guys are gonna be going to Rum River, that's a great school, and we kind of were misled through that process. It wasn't until later, after our house had been already started and we had already started to build our new life in Minnesota, that we found out we would actually be going to Anoka Middle School. We would also be going to Anoka High School. And then later found out our kid can no longer play hockey with his friends that he had made. And I know that it's sometimes hard when you're looking at numbers to sit there and say, well, we can't make this work. This is just a boundary issue. My son has told me there's one bus that goes from Rum River that won't be going to the elementary, or the same middle school that the rest of the kids will be going to. It is a very small population, but it is really affecting him. I remember one of the first days that he came home after going to school and said, Mom, I have kids in my class that are also on my hockey team, and that is so awesome. He was grinning from ear to ear, and he was so excited to be able to share that. And that same kid that was growing from ear to ear when we had to tell him that the district told us we can no longer play for Andover youth hockey because we don't fall in the Andover high school borders, was crying, was tearing up, and said, I can't believe I can't play with my friends. I can't believe that these people I have built this relationship with during this process of building the house, I can't continue that with. And as we're looking into the statistics more, it is a very small portion that is getting affected by this. And we've been told, well, you guys can just move. We've just built our house. It's not even completely finished at this point, and we've been told to move. We've been told that really, I don't think they're gonna matter. It's such a small percentage. If you want, you can just open enroll. But I'm also hearing people that have asked for open enrollment and wanting to be in district that haven't been able to because there are people from outside of Andover that are getting those spots. As a mom, want to protect my kid. He's not here as a prop, but he's here to know that each of those decisions you're making is a person, and he has cried pretty much every night for the last 10 days. And as a parent, that is heartbreaking to know that your kid isn't part of a community. And within the boundaries and how they're set up, it is setting up kids to not be able to find a community. Because he's told for 6 years of your life, you get to be at a school that is 98% Huskies, and we're gonna have spirit days, we're gonna have Husky days, we're all gonna wear black and gold, and we're gonna cheer on our team. And you have 24 of those kids looking around going, I don't belong. I don't fit in here, and this is not right for those kids to have to go through that. And my son is a 5th grader, so next year he will be going to a middle school. The way those numbers break out, it sounds like it's about 4 or 5 kids that are gonna be going from Rum River to Anoka Middle School. And I know, kind of if you're thinking about middle school, we all went through that awkward phase where we didn't know who we were, we didn't know what we belonged, we didn't know how awkward it was. I've even seen Facebook posts of people who have just recently gone through that transition, and they said, you know, oh my gosh, my daughter was so nervous when she went to her locker, but the second she turned around and she saw her friends, they hugged and they were all excited and they skipped down the hallway. My kid doesn't have that. And there's a few other families that are in the same situation that are not going to be able to. He's going to a brand new school and he knows nobody. And I was looking up just the effects of how they're starting a program on middle school and how difficult it is to start middle school and how we need to have programs to help that adjustment. And now we're putting these kids in a place where they're not going to be in the same experience as everyone else in their class. Most of theirs are going to the same class and they get to go play with each other, they get to see each other. My kid gets to, if he gets a chance to open and enroll, he can do that, but he's still not allowed to play hockey with them. Or he goes to Anoka and he is an outcast. He is at the ability where he might get bullied because of these decisions that have been made. And I get on a map, it doesn't make sense, and the numbers just don't work, and I'm so sorry, we can't really do anything about that. This is a family. These are my kids. These are my life, and this is making a big impact on them. And I'm sorry, I don't know what the rules are. We were originally told that you guys will be looking at boundary changes in the fall of 2024. We've been crazy. We have a lot going on in our family life, but we didn't find out until yesterday that that was pushed to last year and that that's not even a consideration. So I guess my plea as a mom that cares so much about my kids, I want it to be something that we're addressing. I don't want it to be something that we can't talk about for another 3 or 4 years because it's not on the agenda. I want to make it on the agenda because these kids deserve more. These kids deserve a chance, and they deserve to have the same experience that their classmates are having, and right now, it really doesn't feel like that's the case for these kids. And again, it is such a small number. I can't see 24 kids in the span of 5 years really affecting the school boards where we don't have enough spots at Oakview and we don't have enough spots at Andover High School. And we are members of Andover, and we are so proud of it. But it's very hard when we're told, and our kids are told, that their identity is so separated based on what grade they're in, and that half of their life they're going to be an Andover Husky, and half of their life they're going to be more so focused on Anoka, and they just don't belong in either group from what it feels like right now.
I can also speak to my personal experience. I moved around a lot growing up. I was never in the same school until I was in high school. That was 12 different schools growing up, and it is very difficult in that situation to know where you fit in. And I know as a sixth grader, in that adolescent life, you're trying to feel out where do I fit in this world? What am I a part of? Where do I belong? And a situation is being created because of the boundaries that he'll never figure that out. He can't figure that out. And he doesn't have a support system to help with that. He's not even the cool new kid that has a cool story because he came from somewhere else. He's just a kid from another school. I can touch on the bullying piece right now because he's actually scared. He's scared of it. He has said that if I can't, and we don't get the decision to be able to play for Andover, I'll play for Anoka, but I'm not going to tell my friends. I only have a small group of friends that I trust that won't make fun of me and won't say anything to put me in a position where I'll be made fun of. That's concerning, moving forward. Yeah, that's because of boundaries.
Thank you for the comments. Any final thoughts wrapping up? Otherwise, we're,
Do you have anything to say, Mace?
thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Natalie Hansen.
Hello. Thank you very much for your time this evening. My name is Natalie, and I am actually Amanda, James, and Mason's neighbor. My son Harry is in the back over there, and we all live in the Peterson's Farm neighborhood in Andover, Minnesota. Currently, district lines delegate that our children will attend Anoka Middle School and Anoka High School. I am here today to ask the school board to consider redrawing the district boundaries to include our neighborhood into Oakview Middle School and Andover High School areas. I was recently told by a teacher at Rum River that very few kids at Rum River will end up attending Anoka schools. She thought only 10 or so per year that will not end up going to Oakview. That was really disappointing for me to hear, as my son will spend 6 years making friendships and relationships with district teachers that he will not be able to will not be able to take with him to middle school. In a transition for children that is already really hard, making the leap from elementary school to middle school, it is not fair to make a few number of children have it be even harder to have to make all new friends in the classroom and through sports. We have also heard countless stories from friends who work at schools in middle school and high school that recount the many out-of-district kids that are brought in and open enrolled. Kids whose families do not contribute to our tax base in the area, kids that do not live in our city, and really don't share any sense of community. Meanwhile, kids in my neighborhood in Andover trying to open enroll into these schools, and we are told that they are being denied. In the city that they pay taxes in, they're being denied open enrollment. Most recently, while trying to sign up for youth hockey, our family was told that my son was not eligible to play hockey in the city that we live in because he is in the boundary for Anoka High School. Every other sport he has played for Andover. He is an Andover Husky. And now he is being forced to play hockey for a different city, and he is not allowed to play hockey and use a very expensive ice rink and community center that our tax dollars pay for. Our neighborhood and close surrounding neighborhoods have started to gather and discuss this boundary. Myself personally, my family, my close neighborhood community, and my friends ask that you please redraw the boundary in order to include our area into Oakview Middle School and Andover High School so that our kids are not separated in an unfair way and that we can attend schools within the community and city that we choose to live and pay taxes in. That's my spiel. I do also have a question about how do we interact with you in like a back and forth type of way? Is there any sort of forum for that, or is it always just like this?
You are always free to send any board member or the entire board an email or give us a phone call.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next agenda item is item 6, board calendar and district update. Superintendent McIntyre.
Thank you, Co-Chair Arco. Tonight I'll be presenting some items of interest for the board and their community regarding activities and events that we are proud of in our district. We do this to celebrate students, staff, and community members who are contributing to the accomplishment of our mission, which is to effectively educate each of our students for success. So to start us off tonight, I think Jim and Heather are helping me here with some of the slides for you to see. The district was in attendance in support of the City of Anoka's Anti-Crime Commission at their annual meeting on Tuesday, October 22nd. This is a community-based partnership organization that makes a positive impact for safety. The school district benefits from a strong partnership with our area law enforcement, and the district has a history of some of our leaders being on and serving on the board of directors for the Anoka Anti-Crime Commission. Marching bands from Anoka-Hennepin's 5 traditional high schools collected high honors at the Youth in Music Minnesota State Championships and Class Championships at U.S. Bank Stadium on Saturday, October 12th. Anoka High School took the first place title in the Class A division. 3 other Anoka-Hennepin marching bands secured top 10 finishes in Class A. Andover High School placed second and earned the Percussion Champion Award. Coon Rapids High School placed 7th, while also earning the Color Guard Champion Award. Blaine High School placed 8th. In Class AA, Champlain Park High School took 2nd place. So congratulations to all of our marching bands on a strong showing at this year's state championships. In addition, I also wanted to mention that Coon Rapids High School Activities Director Jeff Thompson was honored as Administrator of the Year for his support of the band programs at Coon Rapids High School. Congratulations to Mr. Thompson. And finally, the district has a strong tradition, and we know this over the years, of having excellence in music, which includes being named one of the best communities for music education now for 10 consecutive years. All right, the most historic school site in Anoka-Hennepin is our newest site, as we formally dedicated Two Rivers Transition Program at Franklin here in October. Co-Chair DeShane had the honors of cutting the ribbon and opening a new chapter for a location that has served as a school site since 1871. This is just 13 years after Minnesota became a state and 7 years prior to the formation of the city of Anoka. Two Rivers Transition Program at Franklin is a program that brings together 2 programs in one facility. The former Bridges program, which relocated from a shopping center in Andover, and Pathways program, which migrated to Anoka from the Coon Rapids Family Center Mall. The program serves over 225 students with disabilities, ages 18 to 25, to learn workforce skills and life skills to manage independent living. This move provides a much improved education setting for our students and also saves taxpayers over $593,000 annually from the canceling of the leases for that space. Anoka-Hennepin remains committed to maintaining facilities in the city of Anoka, and the district across the board and has invested over $50 million recently at schools located in Anoka, including the Two Rivers location. State and section tournament competition continues over the next several weeks as students conclude the fall season. Andover High School boys soccer advanced to the semifinal round of the state tournament with a win over number 3 seed Minnetonka. They play in the semifinals on Wednesday, October 30th against Maple Grove. This makes the third straight and sixth overall appearance at state for the Huskies. Champlin Park Volleyball faces Maple Grove with a trip to state on the line. The section championship is set for Wednesday, October 30th at Osseo High School. In Section 7, 4A, Anoka and Blaine are in the semifinal round with games played Tuesday and the championship match for Thursday. In football, the road to state for Champlin Park and Anoka both go through Lakeville. The Rebels are on the road at Lakeville North, and the Tornadoes host Lakeville South Friday night in the semifinals. In the other 6A bracket, Blaine travels to Forest Lake. And in 5A, Andover advanced to the section final where they play at top-seeded Elk River on Friday night. Cross-country, girls swim and dive, and adaptive soccer tournaments are set for November. So best of luck to all of our student athletes in these competitions. Also, kind of a historic ending and a gracious donation for one of our schools. Advent Lutheran Church, located across the street from Lincoln Elementary School for the Arts in Anoka, recently closed its doors, but its legacy of community support will live on through a generous donation of $124,195 to Lincoln Elementary School for the Arts. So just an amazing donation. Members of Advent Lutheran Church have been involved with Lincoln for well over 50 years, donating countless hours of volunteer service, food drives, school supplies, clothing, and other items for students in need. Schools benefit from partnerships like this and strong community support, and this donation will be facilitated through the Anoka-Hennepin Education Foundation. So thank you so very much to that generous donation. And lastly, Election Day is set for Tuesday, November 5th, and students will not be in school in Anoka-Hennepin as 15 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and 2 early childhood facilities will be serving as polling locations. There are no school district elections on the ballot, and I just want to say thank you to all who take the time to get involved, informed, and vote. Chair Arco, that concludes my superintendent's report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent McIntyre. Our next agenda item is elementary and secondary education, item 7A. We're going to discuss the Morris Leatherman Community Survey. Welcome, Peter Leatherman from the Morris Leatherman Company.
Is this on? We're good?
Yes.
All right, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening to go over the results. It's the same presentation that I shared in the work session, so just sharing it publicly, kind of go over some of the slides a little faster than we did in the work session. If we go to the first slide on methodology, we spoke with 500 randomly selected residents across the community. The 500 samples projectable to plus or minus 4.5% in 95 out of 100 cases. We then did a parent balloon, so we could look at a subsample of parents because there were some specific policies the district wanted to look at, such as school start times and the middle school schedule. And so that 400 samples projectable to plus or minus 5%. Non-response rate was 6%. Average interview time was 14 minutes. And it is important to note the timing on this. This was in August. So on the questions about budget cuts specifically and awareness, there's really limited awareness going on everything. People are tuned out during the summer. So that's going to impact some of those questions. Obviously, those numbers would be very different right now as you're in the midst of discussion of budget cuts. Putting up some demographics. First off, how long has the person lived in the Anoka-Hennepin School District? The typical resident's been in the district for about 16 years. 10% have a preschooler or an infant. 28% have a child attending the Anoka-Hennepin School District, and then 70% are empty nesters. And once again, that does not imply an age, it's just lack of presence of a child. 17% are renters, pretty even divide between owners of homes under 300,000 and over 300,000. Ethnicity, 58% white, 19% African American, 10% Hispanic Latino, 6% multiracial, and then Asian Pacific Islander and Native American. The typical age of the respondent came in right at about 47 years. Men and women were equally represented in the sample, and then you can see the geographic distribution, and those are based on registered voter counts in communities. If we go into some of the general big picture view on how folks feel about the Anoka-Hennepin School District, we've asked this question for probably the last 20 years in doing this survey, and that is, how would you rate the quality of education provided by the district? We saw the decline, just like every other district did in from 19 to 21 with the pandemic. We went from 33% excellent down to 21%. That 21% was stable over the past 3 years. We do have an uptick now. It did go 5% in the excellent category for a total of 84% rating the district favorably. The state average and what differentiates school district is the excellent rating, and that is at 11%. So it is moving in the right direction, and I think the district's at a point now of going back to where it was before the pandemic, that the shift is now to get people more enthusiastic about what's happening in the school district, and move them from the good position to the excellent rating. Now, what do folks value? What do they like most about the district? 18% point to the teachers, but if we combine the good education and excellent education, we actually have almost 30% indicating it is the academic quality that they're resonating to. And then if we combine the good programs, the good college prep, and the broad curriculum, you have 25% that are reacting to what's being taught in the classroom. So the hierarchy here is the academic quality and the programs and offerings in the district, and then the teachers. What do they think is the most serious issue facing the district? Well, high taxes has been the growing issue over 23 and remains in 24. The norm on this right now is about 15 to 20%. So a little bit on the lower side. Large class sizes at 13%. You can put together the budget cuts and funding. That forms a coalition of about 23% that have concerns on a financial level in the district. And then if we look at the bullying and lack of discipline, that's a 16%, 1 in 6 reacting to that sort of aspect. You don't have anything hitting 25, 30, 35%, but you do have a series of issues in the high single digits and low teens to be aware of. Now, what is the overall reputation? In 1 or 2 words, how would they describe the district? It's good. 24% say it's excellent, 18% average, and 7% large. That's been very stable over the course of the pandemic. The excellent rating had started to increase pre-pandemic, and now it kind of just reflects that overall rating on the quality of education. Parent perspectives. I'll keep this one simple. It's a sea of blue instead of a red riptide on all of these things we've tested. And so, overall satisfaction in looking at parent responses on this, the thing to look at is the strong agreement versus the soft agreement. And you have more parents softly agreeing than strongly agreeing. So once again, that's an intensity, an enthusiasm to move parents into that stronger position. One of the policies I mentioned the district wanted to explore was start times. So first off, we told parents exactly what the school start times were for each level. And we asked if the elementary school start times were too early, about right, or too late. A third said too late. 60% said about right. So we follow up and we ask folks, parents, would you support an earlier start time? Only 39% would support an earlier start time. 11% would favor a later start time. So there's not any sort of majority in shifting of elementary school start time, simply because the vast majority of people think that they're about the right time. Similarly, on middle schools, it's even more unanimous, with 78% indicating that middle school start times is about right. And we have basically an equal distribution on too early versus too late. So then, in asking the follow-up with this, would you support an earlier start time or a later start time? We had 78 and 89% opposition, because there's satisfaction with the school start time. Now, in doing these school start time surveys for many districts over the past 30 years, it's always comes to high school start times as kind of the impetus for this discussion. You actually do have a majority of parents, though, indicating that the high school start time is about right. 42% too early, 3% too late. So it's not surprising then when we ask an earlier start time. Absolutely not. But even the later start time, it's a 45-55% opposition to it. There's just not clear consensus. There's not the concern on the start time issue. And basically, if you choose to change high school start times, then you have to impact middle school and elementary school down the line. And so there's just not appetite or desire or even the concern on the start times at this point in time. What about changing the middle school schedule to 6 periods? We just gave them a brief intro paragraph stating the current class schedule at 7 and the district exploring the potential to go to 6. There was support, albeit lukewarm. 3% strongly supported, 57% support, 25% opposed, and 15% were unsure. If we go back to the whole sample, we had 28% indicate that they or a member of their household had participated in a community education program over the past 2 years. Overwhelmingly high satisfaction, including, you can see the enthusiasm on this, with 70% rating saying that they were very satisfied. What would folks advise the district to improve the quality of education? 24% indicate small class sizes. 19% say go back to the basics, 17% talk about better discipline, and 12% better spending, less technology focus, better teachers, more choice. But once,
Just a second. Director Langenfeld?
oh, I'm sorry.
Just a quick question. How are these questions asked? Are they given choice, or is it all just open-ended?
This one is an open-ended question.
Okay, so some are and some aren't?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the majority are closed-ended.
Okay,
I'll make note as I go through the rest on what's
Perfect.
open-ended and
Thank
what's
you.
not.
Appreciate
This
that.
is open-ended, so they can tell us anything. We collapse them down into categories. So you have 3 items that are about 1 and 5 are talking about: class sizes, the basics, and discipline. What's the most important indicator of a high-quality district? Now, this is close-ended. They read this list, and we asked them, what is the most important indicator? You have 4 that basically tie: reasonable class sizes, broad curriculum, the number of graduates going on to further education, and safety and security. Then down the list, it's up-to-date buildings and facilities, standardized test scores, increasing property values, awards of excellence, reducing the achievement gap, and state-of-the-art technology. So those 4 items approach almost 2/3 of the sample, indicating it's safety and security, grads going on, broad curriculum, and class sizes. Now, how does the district do on meeting the learning needs of all students? Most, only some, or very few? I noted in 23, you were one of the few districts that actually got over the 50% threshold of saying you're meeting the learning needs of all students. It stayed at 56%. That's very strong in comparison since the pandemic started. You can see in 21, the all was down to 38%. And following up with the most, only some, and very few, is there a type of learning, a student whose learning needs are not being met? It's the same everywhere. It's the underachievers and it's the struggling students. It doesn't matter if I'm in Bewabic or in Anoka-Hennepin. That is the concern across the state of who's getting left behind currently coming out of the pandemic. How does the district do in offering a wide range of educational opportunities? Well, this is important, thinking back to what they like most about the district. It was 91%. A bit of a drop to 84%. Still on this one, it is a soft yes. And it's difficult to have this conversation as you approach budget cuts, but it really is an important value in the district. It's what they look at, it's what they have an expectation for. How does the district do in promoting high achievement for all? For all students, there was a 10-point drop, and it went into most students. No change in the only some or very few. So just a bit of a drop. This is, 2 data points a trend does not make. You would need a third data point to see where folks are, where the differentiation is between all and most. Overall quality comparison then, and we set the comparison to 3 years. It's not fair to go back before the pandemic and ask folks if they think it's better, about the same, or worse. Last year, 50% felt it was moving in the right direction. This time, 59% feel it's moving in the right direction. So even if there are concerns, there is a feeling that things are moving in the right direction. It's actually a 59-to-8 ratio. It's better than 7-to-1. Currently, the norm right now in the metro area is about 3-to-1 positive, it getting better as opposed to worse. Some perceptions of the district, and some of these are obviously going to be impacted by discussions with budget and funding in the district. So spending taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently. 75% this year. The norm right now in the 7-county metro is 58%. Do they trust you to do what's right for the children? Unchanged, 87%. Does the district provide a safe and secure environment? Unchanged, 91%. Does the district do a good job of involving the community? And on this one, the district has always done an excellent job. The pandemic cut this rating because it became hard to involve the community for 2 years, and certain sections of the community didn't re-engage. The 88% is outstanding. The norm right now is 72%, and that really does bode well, and it leads into the bottom one, and the satisfaction with decision-making, that at least they feel they can have a say. Accountability hasn't been an issue in the district for a long time, going back to Jesse Ventura. Like I noted, the satisfaction with decision-making, 83-11. On that one, it's a better than 7-to-1 ratio. Norm on that right now is about 4-to-1. And that really is directly connected to, do they feel that they can be involved in what's happening in the district? A key question facing the district, obviously, in the coming years is a potential property tax increase. And this question asks folks, would they support a property tax increase to protect their investment in the Anoka-Hennepin schools? We do have a statistically significant change, and part of it is driven by the discussions happening on budget cuts and what could happen. We had 72% indicate that they would support, 23% oppose, and 5% are unsure. So that disagreement is core opposition, because we're not talking about an operating levy or a bond referendum. We're talking about a dollar amount. They're just against anything. So it means there's more of a willingness to have a conversation. Of all my clients that are on the ballot this fall, unfortunately, during a presidential election, the norm disagreement is at 30% at the outset. So you're you're 7 points lower. Now, that's in concept, and we're going to go in just a little bit on the tax tolerance question. The school board performance, obviously, with everything that's gone on, a 10-point drop in favorable, a 9-point increase in unfavorable, uncertainty at 5%. There is a drop, obviously, associated with what's gone on, but still, the norm right now is 55% favorable to 40% negative. If we look at the superintendent and administration, a similar drop, 5 points. This is a better than 3-to-1 ratio. The norm on superintendents and administration right now is 2-to-1. And then if we look at teachers, It's a 90 to 10. They're actually more favorable than they were pre-pandemic. And this is actually strong looking at comparisons. Ratings of teachers have dropped a bit over the past 4 years, a lot of it with discussions with unions and things that have played out in the media, so that the norm favorable rating on teachers and instructors is between 80 and 85%. So a very strong rating in Anoka-Hennepin. Are Minna schools adequately funded? 43% said yes, 42% said no. Do people believe Anoka-Hennepin has sufficient funds to provide a high-quality education? 48% said yes, 45% said no. This is the current state of where we are in the state on the question of adequacy of education funding. We don't know. After 21, with education funding increase and discussions from the legislature in St. Paul, we had 75% of people indicating that their districts were adequately funded. Now, coming out of the 23 biennium, what happened there was discussion of money, but now folks are hearing about budget cuts in school districts, operating levies during presidential elections. People don't know what to currently think about the adequacy of funding. Overall assessment of financial management then, obviously impacted with the current discussion, but still 10 points higher than the norm of 52% on the favorable rating. The value provided by the Anoka-Hennepin School District, this is driven, the key input here is the value is what you pay in property taxes. And we know that property tax concern has gone up since 2022. And so it's 65% favorable to 32% favorable. That 2-to-1 ratio is right at the norm now. Everybody's district has been impacted by perceptions of high property taxes coming out of the reassessment across the state in 22. If they heard the district was going to ask for a funding increase, are they for all, against all, or persuadable? You start out 1% in the lead, 28% are against all, 27% are for all, but then the persuadables, the largest section at 45%. The key obviously is going to be what would the amount they would support. First off, the nothing. We always want that to be under 35%. So if we look at where folks are at that are willing to accept a property tax increase, it's between $8 to $10 a month. And school boards always ask, is that number set in stone? It's absolutely not set in stone. It's meant to give you an indication of where the community is at, knowing that the further you go from that, it matters greatly what the funding request is for. There's a big difference between, say, mental health support and outdoor athletic space for sports teams. I mean, in the minds of the public. Folks are prioritizing, and we're in the current state right now that the districts that have the best chance of success this fall have prioritized the needs versus the wants. In assessing that. And obviously maintaining program, avoiding budget cuts, all of those sorts of things are highly prioritized. There's not as much excitement for an enhancement or expansion of programming and services by schools currently. I noted the timing, awareness was limited. This number would be different now, absolutely, but 41% in August were aware the district was facing $21 million in cuts. A new section that we added was a discussion of topics and an emphasis on topics in the schools, and this is set up like a stoplight. Too little, there should be more emphasis. Red, too much, stop, yellow, about the right amount. And on this one, I'll just kind of go through it quickly. If we net out the too much versus too little. On the too little nets out the basics, then mental health support, career tech education, and then music and fine arts. If we look at where it nets out too much, it revolves around DEI, slavery and racism, gender identity, and LGBTQIA+ issues. This is the overall. So how do parents feel? on these same topics, and they pretty much mirror the community as a whole. In fact, parents are more intense on more emphasis on the basics, more emphasis on mental health, career tech education, really are prioritized by parents. Similarly, parents are a little bit more divided on the community with DEI and slavery and racism, still tips to too much, but they reflect the community with gender identity and LGBTQIA+ issues. And then finally, the rating of school district communications. This is always, in the summertime, there's always a tick down. Traditionally, your surveys were done in late spring coming out of the school year. So the 78% positive rating is a summer rating. Typically, we see that go to about 70%. But still relatively strong, and amongst parents, it was over 85% rating the school district communications as positively. So I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Co-Chair DeShane?
Just a quick thank you for your time and effort on presenting this to us in a way that we could understand and have at the work session and then now so that the public can see the results of this. I think you had mentioned that Anoka-Hennepin has done a survey of this nature for an extended amount of time. Could you give us the exact amount of history that we have behind survey results like this?
I believe we started doing this in the after the failed operating levy in 1996 or 7, probably 7, with the regular check-in every year. And obviously, it's changed over the years. Some years it's much more. I mean, for a while, from 15 to 18, it was all focused around the bond referendum. We would have these core sections in. It was kind of like we had the donut. What's the donut hole? This year, we looked at the school start times. We looked at the middle school change. We looked at the emphasis on curriculum. So it has evolved over time, but those core questions, it's quite an extensive database going on with the Anoka-Hennepin district.
Thank you. Well, and I think it's really important for us as board members to have statistically valid survey information, reflection of our community voice, and just stakeholder feedback in this way. So thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments? Director Langenfeld?
Just a comment, and first of all, thank you. As you think about the school districts that are currently going out for referendum, you mentioned the need versus want. Are there just like one or two top things that you believe will be received well by the community in terms of support? Like, is it class size? Does it parallel what we saw in terms of the priority typically? Is there any kind of alignment there?
Class size is tough because class size is in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
With specifics. For operating levies, I think the districts that have the best chance of success is a clear message on what the logical consequences are going to be if it doesn't pass. We are back to 2008, 2009 with the recession in looking at maintenance of what we have as opposed to enhancements. If there are enhancements that are supported, it definitely revolves around mental health supports. It definitely revolves around improving reading programs, those sorts of things to help lift that goes back to the foundation. It doesn't matter what's being taught if the kids can't read them. On the bond side, it's safety and security and deferred maintenance.
Okay.
The have-to-haves.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions from the board? Well, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is item 7B, the MSHSL Foundation Resolution. Welcome, Dr. Josh Delich, the Associate Superintendent for High Schools.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Co-Chair Duche, Co-Chair Arco, members of the board, Superintendent McIntyre. Tonight in front of you is our Grant A from the Minnesota State High School League. Through Minnesota State High School League Foundation, the Form A grant helps fund extracurricular participation for our high school students in athletics and fine arts programs. It's a really awesome opportunity for this grant to support schools. And how it works is the unduplicated number of participants who qualify for the educational benefits, including free and reduced meals. So in this context, just to clarify kind of what does unduplicated mean, it means that each student only counts once, regardless of how many sports or activities that they participate in. But it's a great opportunity and grant to help support our activities in our high schools. So as a member school, we have submitted that resolution to our governing board co-chairs. And now I'd like to just turn the mic back over to you, Co-Chair Arco, and I'm asking for a vote in favor of a resolution in the form.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from board members? Hearing no request for discussion, board members, we have the Minnesota State High School League Foundation Resolution Form A for approval as presented in Appendix K. With no further questions, the clerk will call the roll, please.
Simon votes aye. Hoekman.
Aye.
Audette.
Aye.
Langenfeld. DeShane.
Aye.
And Arco.
Aye. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, that resolution is approved. Thank you very much for the
All right,
presentation.
thank you all.
Next on the agenda, we have item 7C, October 1st Enrollment Report. Welcome Dr. Joel Verduen, Chief Technology and Information Officer.
Thank you, Co-Chair Arco, members of the school board, Co-Chair DeShane, and Superintendent McIntyre. Tonight, I am presenting the October 1 enrollment report. Just some basic information about it. One thing is I will refer to a couple of the graphs that are on the handout in the packet. Otherwise, the slides are pretty just straightforward words. And I'll point out where those particular places are that I'd like to point out. Schools in Minnesota are submitting their enrollment counts on, it's an October 1st process, and so that's the official date for Minnesota when schools do this. We perform 2 major things when it comes to enrollment. One is this enrollment report, and my departments do all of the student data accounting, but then secondly, we do a projections. And we do that sometime in the January timeframe just ahead of staffing because it is what drives the staffing process by taking a look at our students and predicting where our enrollments might change. This enrollment report, you'll see, and we'll point out a few things on here. There are the differences from projections because it matters for a number of things. But also I'll give you some change from the last school year. So I'll talk about some of the statistics in terms of what was it like last year, what are we looking at this year. So my goal is to provide some information on key demographics to let you know of any trends and changes in the data and describe any of the potential impacts. Try to make a few connections to things that go on district-wide. One additional item I'll add is we had a commission study last year. It was just before new board members came on. I think we presented in December of last year. That is a much more detailed enrollment projection, but what I would say at the outset, and I'll summarize at the end, is most of what we are seeing is found within that 10-year study that was done. Some of the implications, such as smaller class sizes at the earliest levels, being one example of what that 10-year report says. Moving on to the next slide. I will talk just a little bit about the idea that the enrollment report, there's several things that are related to it and the impact on facilities and programming. Our projections are staffing, our implications to it, and then there are items that we keep close eyes on. Most recently, we met to talk about open enrollment and boundaries as we're watching some of the schools getting filled up, and we will make a decision usually in this November timeframe as to whether or not we need to close schools to open enrollment. So that's something that we brought back to you around that time each year. So there are some different broader implications than just the numbers and how they change. So the summary of the main points in the different parts of this is that our enrollment declined slightly from last year. Our K-12 projection was off by -0.8%. So we projected a decline, but we didn't project as much of a decline as we actually saw. And I'll go through more details in this. Changes in enrollment does vary by level, so this isn't unusual. Sometimes our elementaries go down, our middle schools go up, our high schools are sometimes off, and it seems like there isn't necessarily a pattern to that, but it is essentially the fact that our students don't stay the same from year to year, and sometimes where students come and where students don't come it can be a little bit unpredictable, but not by a great amount, as you'll see in the total percentage that we were off. Ethnicity does continue to change in a very steady pattern, so that one has been fairly predictable. Our multilingual learner numbers are decently near steady, just a little bit of an uptick this year. And our free and reduced populations actually had a slight decrease this year. So those are the major takeaways for that. We'll go more into detail into the K-12 enrollment. So our enrollment is down by 358 students from last year. We projected a 66 student decrease, which also means that our staffing was built on that. So we staffed for more students than actually showed up. And essentially, just for information, I think for board members, that staffing process kind of corrects itself the next time around. So when we look at staffing, if we've overstaffed one year, we bring it back down to the level that it should have been at and then build on that staffing so that we try to right size the staffing numbers for the students. It isn't really possible to, I think on our best year, we actually were like 1 student off or 2 students off, but across the schools, it varies. So we do our best to determine staffing for the schools. Our associate superintendents keep a close eye on those numbers, and we do make adjustments where we need to. The next slide. Our K-5 numbers have decreased by 224 students from the last year. So that is essentially where most of this decline actually occurred, and it's mostly at kindergarten. The kindergarten class is at 2402. And our kindergarten classes have been in the past fairly stable around the 2,500 to 2,600 number. But this one most recently fell down to 2402 as a kindergarten number. So that's low. That's in our 20-year history, and our kindergarten classes were much larger in the 90s. In our history of keeping these numbers for the years that are in this packet, that 2402 is the second lowest number next to COVID, the pandemic year. And so this is a low number for us. That number, the kindergarten number, is a really difficult one to predict. We use all of our birth rates from the 2 counties, and then we keep track of every kid that's born. We track them in terms of having lived here, but we obviously don't know what happens to them between K and 4 or 5. And then we take all of our preschool enrollments and we roll those forward to try to figure out what our kindergarten numbers are like. And so we do vary in percentage-wise from the birth rates, but the birth rates are in a downward trend, and that is part of the report that we heard last December, and it's been true if you looked at our enrollment history. And I will point that out on page 4, that kindergarten history. You can see that on that graph, there's kind of a line you could draw that would just sort of be a slightly declining line on page 4 of the enrollment packet as they're numbered at the top. That one shows the kindergarten going across. We graph them for 20 years, but there's enrollments that go even further back, and you can see they were up in the 3,000s back in 1994. So the declining birth rate is probably the biggest driving factor in our enrollment, and then moves-ins, outs, open enrollments, those types of things kind of modify that number to a degree. The K-5, so I'm sorry, I did actually state that last bullet, thank you. You can move to the middle school. For the middle school enrollments, they were actually up 78 students. Middle school has had a bit of a trajectory that has been down the last couple of years. They went back up by 78 students. What happens at middle school and high school is we get an influx of students at 6th and 9th grade. This is something that's very predictable. That number for 6th graders tends to be maybe 3 to 4%, and for 9th graders it tends to be 5 or 6% new students. And those are likely students coming to us from other programs that have made a decision, maybe that's the right time to move. Maybe there's other driving, I imagine there's a multitude of driving factors, but that number is consistent, and that's pretty common for schools across the state for them to have a bump in enrollment in those years. So our middle school enrollments were up by 78 students. Our high school enrollments were down by 212 students. Another very predictable pattern, our high schools tend to lose students as the year goes on. It is something that's not seen at the other levels, but it's just a very predictable program. Some kids exit after their first or second try if they're returning for work, schoolwork. And so that is a piece of sometimes what we see there. So not a lot of change for those secondary schools. Our ethnicities, there is something that I would draw some attention to in the ethnicity part of the report. While our ethnicities are actually continuing to follow the same trend lines that they have been following, we tend to tick up in the number of students in almost all of our minority categories, and that's true in this report as well. We do have we added a new page to this report. So for the very first time, we were reporting the state level ethnicities. They are beginning to be reported on when it comes to the Minnesota Accountability System, which is state reporting for testing. And we wanted to make sure that we included those here and to let you know what the difference is between them. And so in 2017, the legislature approved a statute that asked for the Department of Ed to be more granular about different ethnicities and finding out which ones, as an example with Native Americans, how many of our students belong to the most populous Native American tribes in the state of Minnesota. And so that's one example where they've decided, the federal just says yes or no. In Minnesota, we ask sub-questions that will go further into those ethnicities. Minnesota also considers North American Native populations as being Native American, while the federal government recognizes North America, Central and South America. And so those numbers end up being calculated a little bit different way. And so we have forms that we've been given from the state. Parents have been filling those forms out that way. The federal one is also defined for us, and we just use the federal and the state forms for when people fill out their ethnicities. So the net result of the difference, and I'll just simply try to make this hopefully as easy as I can. What happens is we end up losing students on the state that categorize themselves as 2 or more ethnicities, and we end up picking up students that are Native American. And the specific reason why is the state of Minnesota says if somebody chooses Native American plus another category, they're considered Native American for the purposes of Minnesota. If they do that federally, they're considered 2 or more. And so that difference plays out in the numbers that we have here. It also is and will continue to have different numbers being categorized that way when it comes to state testing. And Jonna will talk about that anytime that we have reports on state testing. Most of everything else that we end up working with are the federal ethnicities, and those are on that next page. And we actually changed a little bit in our minority enrollment, went up a little bit, and our majority enrollment went down by about 2%, a little bit less than 2%. That's a trend that we have continued to see across the school district. It's also a trend that's seen statewide. Interestingly, Anoka-Hennepin actually has a lot of similarities to the overall state population. Not maybe surprising given the fact that we cover a large geographic area. Moving on to the EL students. Our EL students actually had just a little bit of an uptick in numbers. We went from 8.67% EL students to 10%. In the past, we've seen a little bit smaller inclines in that. Most of them are across the emerging to expanding categories. And those categories tend to be students that are a little bit further in their journey in terms of being completely proficient in the English language. Next slide. Our free and reduced lunch numbers actually decreased just a little bit. If you recall, I think now this is the second year of meals that are not paid. That we have free meals for all students. And so this is one of the ones where I want to continue to give credit to our child nutrition program because they find new and creative ways to remind families that there are other benefits to signing up for free and reduced lunch. Because if we don't know that, then sometimes things like field trips and other things that can be discounted for students by our schools, they benefit from that, and so it's important for those families to enroll in it. In addition to that, we have the ability to direct certify families, and that has tended to expand over the last couple of years. And when they qualify for one program for the state, then we can direct certify and say that they qualify for this program. So that number went down just a little bit. It had gone up, if you remember, after the pandemic, we had 1 year where there was a 10% increase. That kind of leveled off a little bit, and then this year just went down slightly. So we lost about 1.2% free and reduced students in that area. Next slide. So some just review. It's really likely that our enrollment will continue to be limited by those smaller birth rates. What our district's population tends to do is it gets a little bit bigger. So if we have 1,000 kids come in at kindergarten, it ends up being like 1,300 by the time they're seniors. So that's a function of moving in and moving out. We tend to just pick up a little bit older kids. So that's a good thing. It's not a great thing when the elementary or that kindergarten number starts that low, because that number is going to move through and that cohort's probably going to change a little bit. It's not, we have seen a little bit of up and down with that number, so there's a chance that we rebound and have a bigger kindergarten class next year. But it will likely have an impact of kind of keeping our enrollment pretty steady within a very small variation, I think. I mentioned the birth rates being the most influential item, and that last concluding point is just saying the same thing, that I think this will continue to be our enrollment expected in the near future. Pretty level. If there's going to be change, it's going to be minimal, unless something else happens. And I think that's the concluding slide. It is. I'll take any questions or comments that you might have.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Superintendent McIntyre?
Just a context piece for the board. As I talk with other districts on the metro and statewide, the trend is what Joel described. The kindergarten numbers are down, metro-wide and statewide, and I think we've heard from our, at least Hennepin County, people that it's a 50-year low in 2025 for birth rates. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities that we'll see some low, families are just smaller in the coming numbers. So I think Joel's right. We tend to have a pretty flat enrollment, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see continued low numbers at kindergarten just because of those things with the low birth rates and the fact that that's a trend around the state, not just here locally in our district. Just some context.
Right at?
Question, and I don't know who the right person it would go to, but I'm curious, sort of to substantiate that is, do we have numbers of how many kindergarten-age children reside in the district? So that we could get an idea of, how many are out there, how many of them are enrolled here, so we could, and if we had that, history also, that might be useful, so we could kind of get a good feel for where that trend is at, and is that what's in our specific case impacting us, or are there other factors?
We do know of all the students that would have enrollments in other schools and programs and homeschool. So that number would be one that would be pretty realistic for a number. What we wouldn't have is parents don't have to send their kids to kindergarten. They have to at a certain age, but that's usually first grade. And so there could be some students that aren't enrolled, and we wouldn't necessarily know that. But we do track all of the charter school, private schools, homeschool enrollments, and we would have a little bit more solid numbers on those other programs in the next month or so. And we can certainly do a reporting on that.
Yeah, that's helpful, I guess.
And history.
Yeah, I'd follow it and then say, well, let's not fixate just on the kindergarten number, then let's get to where they're mandated so we can get a feel for some of those other classes too.
Okay.
Just what's the trend and what's going on.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Well, thank you very much, Dr. Verdun. All right. I'll turn this next item over to Superintendent McIntyre. It is item 7D, Phase 2 budget reductions.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair Arco. So consistent with our budget reduction and realignment process and timeline, tonight's an update on the Phase 2 process taking place this fall. And thank you to so many of you that, board members that came to the community meetings here recently. So there'll be some information you've heard before. I always think about the people that, as many times as we review this, there's always someone that's hearing it or seeing it for the first time. So we're trying to make sure we're consistent in our presentation. So if we move on to what I'll briefly cover tonight, and consistent with previous board meetings, is this a brief review of the process for decision-making for Phase 2 and doing that after our completion of Phase 1 last spring. I'll also talk about the quick review of our Phase 2 recommendation and a summary of the community feedback received here recently, and wrap up with a timeline review. In our work leading up to this, I've shared at every presentation the convergence of factors coming together at the same time, really explaining how we got here. And it's really a number of things. The fact that we have stable enrollment growth means we haven't had increasing enrollment, and we know that our funding is tied to enrollment. So we can expect not a large increase in funding. The pandemic relief funds have ended. We have employee contract settlements with actually the last 2 of the 18 employment groups are on the agenda for tonight. Inflation and higher costs for transportation and just general district operations has kind of been in that 5 to 10% range, knowing that we have, when it comes to expenditures as compared to the revenue of about 3% or less projected forward. The anticipation really looking forward is there's no new or additional revenue that we can count on at this point, either state or federal. We'll watch what the next legislative session brings forward. There's also several new either unfunded or underfunded mandates that have limited funding for when it comes to our general fund expenditures. So those have had an impact and will continue to have an impact, knowing that some of the legislative action around those have brought forward one-time funds and not ongoing funds. So as a result, we moved into a 2-phase budget reduction process. We started last spring with Phase 1, knowing that we have to plan for hitting our budget targets for next year, in the 25-26 school year. So just by quick review, if I move on here, Phase 1, you've seen this information multiple times, but that our district is one of many in Minnesota and in the metro experiencing some of the same impacts. The 41 metro school districts are estimating about $300 million in shortfalls. Our Phase 1 reduction plan started right away in February and went through April with the goal of trying to minimize the impact for this school year and moving forward. So we made the move to reduce 5.1 million there, with about 50 positions centrally being affected either through reduction or reallocation. There was also some non-personnel reductions in the areas of transportation and district technology. So the goal was to try to minimize that impact on the school operations at our sites. Phase 2 reductions, again, we dove into this right away in July after we got the budget approved for this school year, moved right into planning for next school year and those reductions for Phase 2. So after the Phase 1 reductions were made, we had a new target kind of reset for $21 million for this year, so that we had about a $26 million target between Phase 1 and Phase 2. So this slide here just reflects the key dates and decision-making that we've reviewed a number of times, with preliminary recommendations that were provided to the board September 23rd at our board meeting. These recommendations were provided to the community and for staff review and feedback through a series of committee open house meetings, kind of open house style meetings, and the online survey process that was available for those who participated. That was late September and early October. Throughout the Phase 2 process, we've talked about the planning parameters at play. So we've taken into consideration the district's strategic priorities, our enrollment, which you heard a lot about here tonight, reviewing existing programs and services, applying this approach through a phased model, looking even further at central office and central administrative reductions, looking back in time on the impact of past reductions, and then Also considering restricted versus unrestricted funding areas, fund balance, class size, making sure we're optimizing operations, and also looking at instructional time and supervision through the school schedules, which you all spent lots of time with considering when it came to middle school and high school schedules. I'll follow up with that in a minute. And then finally, legal and financial compliance that comes along with our budget. When it comes to collecting input and really getting information to you, we started that process this summer with district level leadership in July through the summer, and then developed a number of options for the board to consider and have discussion about. So at the September 9th work session, you considered 5 options and really had a long discussion about the pros and cons of each of those options. And after taking that discussion into consideration, we came back with, which I'll get to in a moment, a kind of a hybrid recommendation, taking elements of those 5 recommendations, especially the first 4. The 5th one was a referendum option for you to consider for the November 2025 timeframe. So that would be a way to bridge the reduction with some reductions at central office and strategic investments, which would just be 2 years ahead of those funds being sunsetted already. And that would be a way to keep the fund balance at about 6%. So we covered all those pieces, and at the September work session began to talk about 2 recommendations for the board to consider. One being kind of a cut now option for this coming school year, and one being an extended option to take advantage of the opportunity for the voters to weigh in November of 2025. So through a lot of changes, this is the recommendation number 1 that we landed on as far as the how to hit that target of 21 million in addition to the 5 million previously cut. This chart reflects the current recommendation number 1 for $12.25 million at the elementary, middle, and high school level. It also includes a $13.75 million total cut at the central office, again, to minimize the impact at the school level, with the district office taking on the majority of the overall reductions from both Phase 1 and Phase 2. In addition, after a comprehensive review of the schedules, the middle school and high school schedules, those changes are not recommended at this time, and the board had lots of conversation and discussion about those schedule changes, and in the end, the direction was to not pursue them. So on the next slide, this is again the recommendation for referendum, should the board consider to go that direction. It's taking into account those 3 key pillars in this option. So to maintain a 6% fund balance, you would sunset early the one-time funds used for strategic investments. Those are $5 million a year, so it'd be a $10 million way to adjust the fund balance, and then couple that with an additional $5 million at the central office. And then you would have to decide as a board whether to, you're still $13 million short potentially, or somewhere in that neighborhood, so you would still need to think about how do we bridge that gap, whether or not that's through a referendum or additional cuts. So overall, if you did go to a referendum option, we could bridge that with strategic investments and central office reductions, and you could pause or delay any cuts at the school level, at the elementary, middle school, and high school level for another year. So just some detail coming up on the next slides. We went through this as well. This is a breakdown of the level at each level, elementary, middle, and high school cuts. So this reflects an effort to try to minimize impact primarily at the elementary level, with over 70% of those elementary cuts away from the traditional classroom. As of today, our total amount needed, 26 million, about 5% of that only is at the traditional elementary classroom. That was one of the interests of the board. So the remaining 95% of the entire 26 million is in other areas. The total number of positions recommended for reduction at the elementary level is approximately 1% of the traditional classroom piece. And again, this is, to minimize the impact at the elementary level. At the middle school level, a little different story. This would result in class sizes increasing average class sizes across the middle school level to increase by approximately 4. With this reduction, the total number of positions is just shy of 6% of our total middle school staff. And without a high school schedule change, the high school class sizes are estimated to increase by about 5 or approximately 5 across when you think average class size, and that's approximately 5.3% of our total high school staff. This is a new slide, some additional information that's provided for you on the next slide. This is a breakdown for you by department at the central office. So when you look at district-wide staff and non-staff reductions, it gives you some additional detail of the dollar amounts per department. And it really, in the end, will reflect another 90 to 100 positions being reduced, in addition to the close to between 40 and 50 positions already reduced in phase 1. So you're getting in the neighborhood of 150 positions centrally. And you'll have additional details at the work session next Monday as we continue to make sure we're honoring our employee contracts, our collective bargaining agreements, private personnel data, and so forth. So with some additional work this week, we'll have more detail for you next Monday night at the work session. But again, at this point, the central office is the majority of the total reductions. It's about 1/3 of the central office positions being reduced as compared to roughly 2 to 6% of positions at the sites. In addition to the reductions, if you go onto onto this slide, these are some realignments that we can make to help minimize the number of personnel reductions. So we can make some realignments within child nutrition, technology, community education, and again, with a new legislative change with student support aid, we can now fund existing positions with that new student support aid. That's additional dollars we wouldn't have to cut deeper into more personnel cuts. On the next slide is where I'm going to get into some of the feedback, the summary from our community meetings and those who participated in the online survey. So I kind of want to make a distinction between engagement and participation. So we know that when we track the hits on our website or the how many people open the emails we push out, we know there's thousands of people. We can confirm that through our data that received the information, which is a different piece than those who actively choose to participate through either coming to a meeting and or filling out the survey, knowing that we made that survey available online. So for those who were not able to attend our community meetings, we did record that first meeting and live, that live streamed option or recorded option is on the district website on the YouTube channel. We did for anyone to view that, and that can still be done. Over 300 residents have viewed that presentation online. And through our communications, we've raised, I think, that awareness piece just through our email push-outs and in the newsletters. So we also had about 274 residents that completed the feedback form that was online. So here's a breakdown of that sample. So 65% of those who filled out the survey or the feedback form were either parents or guardians, and within that, 72% identified they had students in elementary, 33% had students in middle school, and 35% indicated they had students at high school. Of those taking the survey as well, 52% were staff members, so roughly half. And again, others that completed the survey, about 1/3 that completed it do not have students in their household. And then just a fraction of our students took that online survey. Here's a different way to visualize that, and my key takeaway for the board on this is we have sampling from all 5 major high school sectors or clusters in our district. You can kind of see the breakdown there, but it represents that each geographic region of our district is represented in that survey. So some themes that we can take away from those that did participate in the feedback form. The survey asked for a direct response regarding option 1 or option 2 when it comes to either the reductions now or the referendum. And 89% of those who participated supported option 2 or the referendum option in the survey. So some additional breakdown here, just some data I thought you might be interested in. 35 of the respondents added comments about a need for a referendum. Additional themes, so we had about 110 respondents who mentioned class size concerns. 79 residents offered ideas for efficiencies or their own ideas on reduction strategies or areas for reduction to be considered. We had about 47 who shared concerns about losing additional elective options or advanced programming for students. 35 were concerned about staffing changes. 19 actually weighed in on the proposed schedule change, although the board is not currently considering that as part of the proposals at this point. And another 19 were just purely asking for more details on the two proposals. So that is a summary, and I know you have a document in your packet that goes into more detail there, and I think we also provided you with a copy of the comments last week in my superintendent update. So looking ahead, here's another look at the kind of the visual timeline. That blue section across the top is the board-related areas, and the section below are the actions taken by the administration throughout the timeline. So I'll just note that as we continue through this, the richness of the board and each individual having their own ideas and perspectives on what should be considered in the reductions and realignments. And at this point, I've just maintained the two options for the board to consider. Here's your option to reduce now and what that looks like, and then the other option for referendum. And then, as we move into the final month here, should the board provide different direction, then we'll follow that direction, right? So right now we have the two recommendations on the table. We will have, like I mentioned earlier, additional detail on the specifics for those reduction areas, and that'll be reviewed and discussed at the November 4th work session, with final recommendations and board approval still expected at the November 25th board meeting, so that the process is timed in support of our district staffing process in planning for next school year, which starts in earnest really in January, but we get a preliminary jump start on that in December. So to wrap up, the information on the process continues to be available on our website at ahschools.us/budget, as well as continues to be shared with our community members via our monthly district e-newsletter, The Focus, and people can subscribe to that online. We always like to make a plug for that. That kind of wraps up my comments for this evening, Chair Arco. So thank you very much, and we'll take any comments or questions from the board at this time.
Are there any comments or questions from board members? Director Audette?
Yeah, thanks. So first, I have a question. I think it's probably a board question, but I do keep seeing under recommendation number 2, we talk about a referendum option, and we keep saying we're going to maintain a minimum 6% unassigned fund balance, and my question is really a policy question. We have a board policy that mandates a 10% unassigned fund balance. So I don't really know at this point, and I haven't heard us talk about how we would propose we're going to work through that. But to me, it's an important policy question. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I know Ms. Vargas is in the crowd. That is the board's target for fund balance. And, I've fielded questions from all of the board members from, what if we don't cut anything? What does that do to the fund balance? Which brings it even lower, right? So there's a range of options depending on what you want to do. My recommendation is you end the strategic investments early, you make the central office reductions. It still maintains at least a 6% fund balance, but those numbers can move should the board want to move those variables along with it.
Okay, but I mean, it does still leave us sort of in breach of that policy. So I feel, since it's our own policy, that's something we need to put on a discussion point someplace.
And I would say if the board wants to maintain that 10%, then the reductions that
Yeah.
have been proposed, you're going to need to go deeper, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then I think just otherwise, I mean, as I've sat tonight, I think I submitted over 20 questions earlier this week over the weekend. I had no expectation they would be answered, incidentally, and you reminded me of that, Superintendent, so that's fine. But my point really with it is, the deeper you dig, the more questions you have. As I sat here today, and I think I wrote, by the way, 15 more. So, and the questions really stem from deeper analysis of what we're proposing to cut and what we're not. And I'm not going to read through all my list of questions now, but I do think that the goal as stated is to try to minimize the cuts in the classroom. And, I think that my overall summary review of where we are to date, there's still cuts we could make that we have not elected to make propose to make, that would minimize what was happening in classrooms. So the questions I submitted really got to that. Probably one important one that I am going to highlight is just that we analyzed the management, I called it the management impact of the funding of a lot of restricted funding programs. So we have a ton of our budget that comes in through restricted funds. These are funds that get earmarked through federal, state legislation and otherwise. I mean, I don't know all of the places. I did actually summarize it at one point. I had a whole lot of information, and it was dozens, literally, of different, what we call restricted funded programs. And so, in essence, as I understand it, the district takes in a lot of money that's restricted. It comes for various purposes, and it can have an effect where it sort of feels like, I'm going to call it free money. That's my word. But it feels like it's free money because it doesn't come through the normal funding process. But the reality of free money is all of the programs come with a requirement to manage them. There will be people that will be funded. There will be programs that will be funded. There will be some of them have plans you have to write every year. So there's just this overall management impact. And I mean, you can see it just in the sheer number of people employed in our school district that, and especially that are employed as a result of what I'm calling these restricted funded programs. It's a ton. So the more that I look into it, the more I realize that management impact is very significant. I think it has the potential to take away from our core focus, big, important focus areas. And so we ought to do an analysis to say, what would be the effect if we reduced our acceptance of some of those funds? What would it do to the ability to manage the schools on a lower administrative impact? What would it do to sharpen our focus? What would it do to any associated spending that may or may not be connected? Because, these types of programs are always really great, but they never give you quite enough. So then you wind up having to, find other ways to fully fund them. So I'm just presenting that as one big but I think important example. And I'm going to add that, because I've spent 3 years nearly on the board now, arguing against a number of the programs that we have initiative. A big chunk of the programs I'm talking about come through these restricted funds. So when I talk about it taking away from our focus, taking away from feelings of unity, taking away from overall alignment, it has a big impact. So for people who don't know it, where is that? Where is that funding coming from? Where is that spending? Where do those programs come through? A lot of it comes through these types of things. Separate issue that I just want to provide my own color to how we got here. And it's really important because it's our state government that sets laws and funding formulas and all of that for school districts. And we all witnessed the government telling us in the past year or 2 years about the unprecedented funding that they put into schools. We heard it on the news. Some people actually, I couldn't believe it, but some people actually said we'd finally fully funded schools. And then, of course, everybody was confused why, after doing that, we got to this point where, we find ourselves $26 million in the hole. But, a lot of that funding also was tied to different things. So free lunches for every child, even though every child did not need free lunches. I don't believe in any recent time, there's been a child who didn't have lunch at school, whether it was paid through the government or through home. Paid family leave was a requirement that hit us. Unemployment for part-time workers is a massive mandate that the state government put on us. READ Act, it's been talked about a lot. Tampons in all the schools. The list just goes on and on and on. So tons of these mandates that hit school districts went unfunded. We've talked about it a lot. So when the state came out and they said, well, we've had unprecedented funding, much of it was earmarked for specific purposes that cannot pay for teacher salaries and things like that. Despite that fact, when we settled our contracts, people came in for huge increases. That was due to a lot of factors. Inflation's real, also caused in part by the government. And so we really were forced to make the inflationary increases, and here we are. But prior to 2 years ago, when this historic funding was passed, the school district was not in financial trouble. We were solid. And so this is where state politics and education get into it. It was an election year. Our government worked super hard to hand out tons of money to a bunch of people. They didn't want to raise taxes. They did not want to raise taxes during that year, so they spent a bunch. And now here they are, they've left it here. They've left it here at the local level for school districts to try to wrestle with it. Either operate in deficit or pass a levy referendum, which, as Mr. Leatherman points out, you might have a chance of passing it in a scenario where the want versus the needs. And if we're in a really need-based situation, but these levy referendums never go away. They'll be here forever, and so eventually, state government will get around to doing their job. They'll refund the schools, and the levy will still be here. And at that point, that money will be directed into something that may or may not be a want or a need. So I don't feel I do a good job as a board member if I don't raise those issues, dig deep into the proposed cuts, dig deep into the proposed budgets, ask 15 questions over the weekend, come up with 15 more now. And I'm going to continue to do it. But I think that there's still plenty of work to be done that could result in less cuts to our classroom than we currently have on the table. And I want to encourage us to continue to pursue it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of thoughts, and then I'll let other board members jump in. On the second part, we agree. Yeah, and we're working to do our part as we enter into this next funding session, right? Can't guarantee, all we have right now is what they've committed to from a small increase to a consumer price index. So beyond that, we'll see what kind of impact we can make. So just a couple of high-level thoughts, because you covered a lot of ground there. Early September, the board asked me for my recommendation. So through the work of the expertise of our administration through the summer, that's what I provided to you, right? If you, as a board, and the majority of you say, go another direction, we'll do that. But I gave you my best and our team's best path forward. And yes, I agree on some of the areas around restricted funding. If you look at what's on the table, there are reductions in special education, multilingual learners, achievement and integration, all in areas that that restricted funding that we get provides the critical staff and services often required by either state or federal law for those students who have learning needs. So for one example, there's $2 million of special education cuts in there that because of the funding formula, we only realize $500,000 of actual general fund savings, but those are 50 jobs that we would cut to realize that. So that's one example there that are in your materials. And then lastly, I think the district's prided itself on minimizing the administrative impact, or, when we're at less than 3% of our budget centrally, you've heard me say it before, that's near the bottom of the largest districts in the state, 30th out of 34. So we are doing a lot with very little to begin with. I gave the board, as requested, what does $15 million look like? What does $18 million look like? So you have that. If you want to go deeper, and that's the direction of the board, I've given you 3 additional steps along the way. And like I said earlier, you all have your own vision or own ideas on what you think should be looked at and to what degree. So we'll have to eventually get to board direction from the majority of you on how to move forward, whether it's reductions now or whether it's delaying those and doing that later, or looking at other revenue possibilities, depending on what's coming forward state-wise, from the state and so forth. So I think I'll just end it there. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments from board members? Director Simon, I believe, was first.
Oh, sorry, jumping on. Thank you, Zach. I have one question first, and then I'll make a comment about the discussion that's been occurring. Superintendent, and I know Michelle's there too, she may need to speak. On recommendation number 1, where we've already done 5 million, of course, that's done, so there's 21 more million in cuts. And you have it broken out on this slide where elementary, middle, high school, phase 2 central services. So in that option, if that option were to go forward, we would, am I right to say that we'd continue our $10 million of strategic investments for the next 2 years?
Yes.
We would, okay. So those would continue, and we would do permanent cuts. Obviously, strategic investments are a one-time cut and not ongoing, so it'd be all the ongoing cuts, and strategic investments would continue.
Correct.
I don't think thanks. I should have, that looks pretty clear on the slides and everything. For some reason, it just didn't register in my brain, so thank you. So the discussion that just happened, I mean, maybe just a few quick comments about it. First of all, I have always been an advocate of any board member that has a question should get their questions answered, right? I mean, we make important votes here, so I think it's needed, and how much time is needed, it just has to be done. So I'm supportive of that. And Member Audette made comments about the state government, and I agree, there are, and we've said it so many times about the unfunded mandates, right? They're not just new to this last legislative session, they've happened throughout our history. One thing I think, I always try to look at both sides of it. One thing that this board, and it's this board, not past boards, that we had control over, and the main reason that we need to cut is how we settled our contracts, right? So we gave, and I agree with it. I think our staff deserves even more than we were able to do, but we were able to do it, and we agreed upon it. But that's a decision this board made, and we made that decision knowing that if we did this, we were going to have to cut. So I think that's an important distinction too, regardless of what the state government does that we don't necessarily have control over. We have control over what we have control of, and we did make those decisions. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Just one, I forgot to acknowledge, thank you for the questions. We will get answers to you, and I think to all the good ones that all the board should have, and definitely by the end of this week, if not sooner. There was quite a few there, but we're going to get those answered for all of you as soon as possible.
Director Langenfeld.
First of all, I appreciate questions, and I've noted that earlier. I think if we, the more we can unearth what's going on and really do a deep analysis, the better decisions we'll make. Just speaking of an analysis, as I think about, and conversations are being held as to which positions and so forth, The administration has provided us with the recommendations. And for me personally, the questions that I really want to have a deeper understanding of is the unintended consequences. Sometimes we can understand the position, but the impact, it's like a value on the impact of what that really means to a student, because there's trickle-down kinds of an unintended consequence. So for example, if we cut something out of central office, how does that impact the principal, that impacts this, the classroom teacher? And as I've been out and about just having conversations with educators who have, friends have reached out, the considerations of different opportunities, what that looks like. People have different ideas as to what that is. So questions are being asked about, are we giving consideration to the impact of the cuts in central office and what they will do to the student in the classroom. Eventually, it works both ways. So that would be one area I'd really like to have just a little deeper understanding. I can understand the positions, but the question is, and I know that our administration is working very hard to minimize that impact, but to just have some clarity around that. The other thing I would offer is, and this is a question, and maybe I'm thinking or reflecting of it this a little bit different, but a lot of the restricted funds in my past experience had to do with legislative, federal, or state requirements. And perhaps just a little more about that as you look at the different areas and categories that are restricted. How many are those aligned with a state or federal statute that's required that we need to provide that kind of programming support or services? And then what does that really look like? Is it even possible to reduce those areas? And if so, for example, I think of special ed, for example, I think of maintenance of effort and what that looks like. You question how much is, when you say restricted, it's restricted for a reason typically because someone has determined that a certain student group should have those resources, really is what that means, in my experience anyway. So I would like to have, to answer, as we look at Director Audette's questions, within that framework, I would like to have that information as well in terms of what really can we look at in those spaces as well. But the other part is I was sitting here listening and just one more comment to the superintendent's report is that for some people this may be new information and they might have missed the window to provide us with input. And I would assume that anyone that is still interested and out in our public that has some thoughts and reflection on what they just heard, it might be for the first time, that they would be able to send an email to the superintendent and the board and get their questions answered as well, or at least provide their comments or concerns. I'd appreciate that as well. We had a good turnout for the timing that we had, but I'm sure there are other people that are talking about this as well. So, thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments from Director Hoekman?
Thank you. That statement was really insightful to unearth what's going on because it's a big district with a lot of money. The size of this budget is huge, and with 5,000 employees, there's a lot of things going on. And just want to make certain, of course, we're always thinking, how are these things going to impact the kids? Of course, we need the staff in place to support the kids, but really digging down to that most basic part is how do we best serve the students in the district? So as I just look and consider that, a question I have is, how long have we had the staffing ratios that we're at right now for our schools? Approximately.
Well, they're reviewed every year, so there's an annual review, and I'm kind of looking to my team here. I'm not sure for certain how many years, when's the last time they've been adjusted, That's really kind of been driven by the budget. They're all intertwined, right? So I can follow up with more specifics on
Yeah.
maybe some history on that.
Is there any, like, 5 years, 1 year, any, like? 2009. Okay. Okay, so 2009, so that's been a pretty long time. During that time, we've had a large increase in staff. The ratio has remained the same, and our student enrollment has been pretty constant. So I guess the question that I have, as related to the question that other board members have brought up, is what are the additional positions funding? And again, it's back to this unearth what's going on. Because if we're growing the number of positions, but we're not adding or changing that staffing ratio to our classrooms, are we getting the return on investment with these new positions that we want? Are they giving us higher achievement in our classrooms? Is it providing the services that our kids need? I feel like in this whole thing, I don't know that we've really assessed that, because I think that's really an important piece when we're looking at how we're cutting positions, and back to that other idea of, are they tied to mandated things? And even if we're getting that, as Director Audette said, kind of called free money almost, is it worth it? How are we looking at that? So just, this is so big, and I just will continue to ask questions, and I thank you for the presentation, and we really have a lot still to unearth.
Yeah, and I'll resend for the board. We did a chart that went back in time, and especially pre-pandemic, how many staff we had, and then by year, and then what areas it was. So I'll resend that. Just, I think it might get at some of your questions. Honestly, one of the biggest growth areas has, for all districts, has been the area in special education. And that isn't free money. They're only funding a portion of that. So every school district's budget takes on the cross-subsidy. And so that's been a challenge across, not even Minnesota, across the country. So the majority of those additions has been for the kind of programming that we've needed to provide for special education and other supports. So I'll make sure to send that, and I would ask board members follow up with additional questions in relation to that trend line by year on what the total FTE the district has had over time, because you're right, enrollment's been kind of flat, and our ratios have stayed the same, but it's been the changes in some of those areas that are mandated by state and federal law too. So I'll try to keep chipping away at that with you. See if we can add some clarity for the entire board in that regard, right?
Yeah, thank you for that. And of course, it's not just the board, we need to be informed and wise, but I mean, it's important for our public to know and have as much clarity as possible as well. So thank you.
Co-Chair DeShane?
Thank you. I just quickly wanted to call attention and focus on kind of the governance of this process really quickly. You know, that's the duty of this board, right, to govern these sorts of things. You know, the majority of the board gave direction to our administrative team and those professionals running their departments and their schools to provide recommendations based on the reality of providing services to our students, our families, and our community. We asked them for options. We agreed all on narrowing those options to focus on, you know, making all of the cuts or bridging cuts to a referendum for further discussion and to gain community input. The people who provided those perspectives and information to us are those that have worked in education with specialized skills, long-standing experience, focusing on student needs, focusing on achievement goals. I just think that's important that we remember that these recommendations are coming from highly skilled professionals with direct experience in the areas that these cuts are going to be coming from. As a board, we also asked for transparency and open communication with our stakeholders. I think that the district communication team, the teams that pulled together all of the in-person meetings at each high school cluster, the virtual option, and several board meetings where we have had presentations where the public could attend or they could watch the recordings afterward is a really important element to this as well. email blasts to families, the text message focus letters. I think that we're doing a good job getting the information out there so that these questions can continue to come and so that board members can continue to have opportunities to engage with the communities that we represent, answering questions, learning from each other and from our stakeholders in this process. So I think the details are very important, but also the governance and just the process that we are following to try to gather this information is important to not lose sight of as well.
Director Simon?
Thanks, Zach. As I hear this conversation, I'm going to ask the superintendent this, and I'm not going to ask for an answer, but just maybe a thought process, and get back to us in the future. It seems like there's still a lot of it doesn't sound like the board is close to maybe having a majority of the decision behind this. So we have less than a month, and there's a lot of stuff you were just asked for. I have no doubt that you will do everything you can to get that and get board members there, but I'm just curious, like, if we get to the point of November 25th and you don't have a majority of the board decide on, agreeing on what to do, I think it's just prudent for you and your administration to find out and let the board know, what does that mean? So don't do it tonight. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know what that means, so I'd like to know. Thank you.
Director Adet?
Yeah, I just want to make another comment and add some perspective. So, first of all, you can't cut a budget anywhere without feelings of, despair. But we have gotten good information. The ability to analyze it takes time. You're working with formats that are unique to this role. I'm personally optimistic we can make the reductions that we need to make and come out in a place that is effective. And for the perspective, I will tell you why I feel that way. If you just, now I'm going to do math in public, and I said before I don't like to do this, but if you just take a $700 million budget and you take 10%, you get $70 million. 5%, 35. 2.5%, 17.5. So if we're talking about 25 million, it's in the neighborhood of 3 to 3.5% of a reduction off of the total. And I get it. I already just talked for half an hour about the different sources of funding, but at the top level, what I'm saying is we're looking at a 3.5% reduction off the total, which for anybody, whether I'm talking business, household, school district, or otherwise, that is a number that is manageable. It's manageable by many all the time. And you may not like to do it. I could actually, from my time, make a case we almost ought to have a policy that says we look to do it every couple of years anyways, to be quite frank. So, and the reason is because when you go back, and just like you do it in your household, when you reprioritize, when you revisit decisions you made previously, is it still working for us? Should we keep putting our money here? Should we keep putting our money there? That's a healthy thing. And so it's hard. Most of us would probably rather not look at this. But if we do it right, we could actually come out in a what I don't know what the right word is, but in a position where we're doing as well or better as we were before. And we can say for certain that we're making a good use of the funds we're provided by our community. And the reason I believe that is because, again, off 700 million, we're looking at 3.5%, which is a number that can be achieved.
I'll throw out a comment. So I love the conversation. I really appreciate it. And so I just want to acknowledge the high tension in the room. And, it, like Director Adet was saying, it's a difficult place to be. None of us want to cut anything, really. Like, in a perfect world, we just wouldn't cut anything. But hopefully, I can maybe get everyone a little bit back on the same page. I don't actually, I've been encouraged with the process thus far. So this is just my gut take. I feel like, and we're all rightfully doing this, there's nothing wrong with this. We're kind of jumping ahead to the conclusion and we're making assumptions about how I think it's going to play out. Totally normal. We all do it. But I think where we're at is actually just a natural piece in the progression of this entire process. and I don't think anything out of the ordinary has happened thus far, and at least I don't feel like or we as a board are in any danger of hitting some like impassable barrier. The reason is, so I agree with everything you said, Co-Chair DeShane, about, them giving us the recommendation. That's what we asked for, they gave it to us. And so far as I'm aware, it has kind of followed, all the board input. So I actually love a lot of the questions that Director Audette asked, and they come at a time when those questions could only be asked as the specifics are starting to unfold. A lot of them, some of them are internal to the board still. Eventually, they'll be external. So there's not really a way that Director Audette or myself or anybody could have even asked the questions really until some of the more specifics had started to be generated. So I think it very much fits in the timeline of almost where you would expect these things to happen. And again, fully acknowledging no one wants to be in this position, no one wants to cut anything. The reality is whether it's the state's fault, certainly they're to blame for certain things, or, we made choices, we're gonna have to own the choices we made. No one's denying that. But the reality is when we make budget cuts, there's pain involved. There absolutely will be pain. And it sounds weird, but maybe a different way to frame this is we get to determine where to deal that pain to. It's a very uncomfortable decision. And it's an important decision because we have no choice but to do it. So I think that's why the tension is high. And really, to kind of echo what Director Audette was saying, but in a slightly different way, it's like, especially for me, or all of us really, it's incumbent upon us as board members to ask the really hard questions, to really, really get to the nitty-gritty of what we're doing and why, justify the decisions, so that when we get to that finish line, we can have that high level of confidence. And yeah, I like I said, I think this is just the natural progression of how everything is played out. I had specifically requested, just to understand broadly, like all of the positions in the district, and I stand by this, I really mean it. It's hard for me to say yes to something when I don't know what I'm saying no to. So if I don't know what positions remain, I'm kind of missing half the context there. So now that we've had more insight into that, I'm kind of forming my thoughts on it. I'm trying to digest it, trying to understand it. I think a lot of board members are doing the same. So I think everything that's happening is a very natural progression of kind of just the timeline of things. So I would encourage us as board members, just ask the questions you got to ask, get the answers. I still think there is some room to, depending on the answers that we get, and who even knows who thinks what about them, there is still some pivot room, right? If we feel we need to pivot. If we don't, that's okay too. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm just encouraging everyone, don't rush to conclusions yet. I'm actually eager to hear the answers to a lot of the questions that Director Audette asked. So that's where I'm at with it. I appreciate all the work you've done, Superintendent McIntyre and Michelle Vargas, compiling that big list for us to review. It has been extremely helpful for me as a board member just to understand, if nothing else, just to have an understanding of what's happening. So really appreciate it, but that's all I had to say. So any other thoughts or comments from the board? All right. With that brings us to a close. The next item on the agenda is item 7E, the Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness, or the World's Best Workforce Achievement and Integration Overview. Welcome, Dr. Jana Romer-Hurt, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Testing.
And friends. Good evening, Chair Arco and Co-Chair, not Chair Co-Chair, Co-Chair Arco and Co-Chair DeShane, Board Member Superintendent McIntyre. I'm going to apologize up front because something in this room is, I'm reacting to it, from an allergy standpoint. So my voice is maybe going to be a little lower in tone than typical, but bear with me. I'm here with my colleagues. This report is one that is put together collaboratively with a lot of folks. And so my colleagues are here to speak on behalf of their levels and the things that are happening in their areas of oversight as well. So we're working on this collaboratively this evening. And I'm going to be a speed talker as much as possible, so try to bear with me. In this presentation, we will, the purpose of it is to present and provide information about the district's 23-24 academic performance to our community as required by World's Best Workforce, which is now in this year renamed through legislation as Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness. So you'll hear that moving forward, but tonight we'll still rest on World's Best Workforce, as well as to provide information around our Achievement and Integration plan. Just the progress of the things that we're doing toward that. It's also to share information and progress with the board members in order to inform decisions about our continuous improvement process, or in alignment with our continuous improvement process. In Anoka-Hennepin, we embrace that continuous improvement mindset, and we value and use data to inform our decisions and improvement planning. Each year, data are compiled and analyzed from a variety of measurement methods and multiple resources to monitor our district performance in relation to a broad range of desired outcomes. In October, this time every year, we present an overview of the previous year's data. And then in November, we consider all other input in conjunction with our year-end data to inform our first draft of our 24-25 strategic priorities ahead of our annual staffing and budgetary processes. One of the tools that we use to monitor and report district effectiveness is our district scorecard. The district scorecard is another tool that is used to inform our continuous improvement planning and goal setting throughout the year. It has a wide range of key performance indicators, as well as a wide range of intended outcome levels. That district scorecard, we'll move on to the next. Our district scorecard informs our strategic priority. It also informs which cascades through our superintendent's goals, and then through the organization to cabinet and administrative goals, as well as school improvement and departmental goals, and ultimately, to our compensation, quality compensation, teacher goals, and classroom student goals. Starting tonight, kind of an overview of World's Best Workforce, again, renamed Comprehensive Achievement and Civic Readiness. There are 6 defined areas, component areas, as you can see on the screen. And then the next slide tells you a little bit about Anoka-Hennepin strategies aligned to each of those. I just talked about goals that cascade through our system. In terms of a process for assessing student progress, we use a comprehensive assessment system throughout our levels and departments. We analyze and disaggregate that data in multiple ways. We have a system to review staff effectiveness through our quality compensation and our performance appraisal system of teachers, as well as principals and other staff throughout the district. We go through a rigorous instructional curriculum process to review and adopt curriculum. And we use things like professional learning community structures, multi-tiered systems of support, and standards-aligned practices in terms of our effective educational practices. We also have over 75% of our budget directly aligned to classrooms.
Anoka-Hennepin Schools is required by legislation to have an achievement and integration plan because according to Minnesota rule, Anoka-Hennepin is identified as a racially isolated school district. Districts who qualify for achievement and integration dollars must use the revenue to pursue academic achievement and racial and economic integration. Achievement and integration goals are established to reduce disparities in academic achievement, reduce disparities in equitable access to effective and more diverse teachers, and increase racial and economic diversity and integration. We are in year 2 of our 3-year plan that was submitted to and approved by MDE in March of 2023. In terms of plan strategies, I'll highlight a few. Advancement via individual determination, or AVID, is a student-centered approach that prepares each student for college, career, and life. As of this fall, AVID is in all 11 traditional secondary schools in Anoka-Hennepin. academic interventions, including math and reading intervention teachers at the secondary level. And finally, Anoka-Hennepin has 13 magnet and specialty school programs that provide innovative programming and school choice across the district.
As we move into looking at our district data, Joel reported on the 24-25 October 1 data. These data go through 23-24. So you can see the trends, some of which Joel spoke to in terms of like that large increase in students qualifying for economic services, between 22-23 and 23-24. You can also see that our students of color, as Joel mentioned, is on a steady increase, increasing almost 20% over the last 10 years. In terms of our students qualifying for language acquisition services and special education services, we've seen a slight increase in those percentages over the last few years as well. We'll move into student perception data first and focus on 3 key areas. The first of which is students who report feeling safe at school. So feelings of safety have declined slightly at the elementary and middle school since last year, as reported by our student engagement survey, but we have seen a slight increase at our high school level. In terms of students who are reporting never having been bullied, students, they have remained relatively steady over the last 3 years, with more students at the elementary level reporting aspects of bullying than at our high school levels. In terms of students who have reported having a good relationship with students, or students who have reported having a good relationship with teachers, overall, students report having strong relationships with teachers at high levels across our system.
All right, safety and connectedness. One of our top priorities in Anoka-Hennepin is the safety of our students, our staff, and our communities. We've done a remarkable job in terms of taking a quick start and start safety guide for all of our schools. We've enhanced our crisis response procedures. As you know, we've invested and continue to invest in just safety measures. If you think about just Champlain Park and their new front office areas, many of our schools are also experiencing those safety measures that we're wanting to put into place. In addition with that, we have these school-wide behavioral plans that we are really intentional about of how do we help support and keep our schools safe, in addition to the big one, that connectedness, that really looking at a strong culture and climate in our schools, not just that you belong, that you are welcome, but that you belong in our schools. So all of our levels are really focused in on whether it's morning meetings that are happening in the elementary all the way up to the secondary, where we're connecting in classrooms for community with our kids and wanting to make sure that people feel that they are welcomed and they belong in our classrooms, in addition to providing that well-rounded experience with their academic programming and support for our mental health and behavioral sports in our schools. We know that by data, we have continued work to do in these 2 areas, but we also have made some really good traction in advancements in our safety and our connectedness for our students in our schools.
Thanks, Josh. We'll move into student achievement data. And aligned to World's Best Workforce, there are 4 goal areas. We can move forward to the next slide. There used to be 5, but the 3rd grade literacy is now incorporated into the reading, or Minnesota Reading to Ensure Academic Development, or the READ Act, that you've heard a lot about. So the 4 areas are school readiness, career and college readiness, closing achievement gaps, and all students graduating. It's interesting to note that next year, actually, there will be a 5th area added that is around students being lifelong learners, measuring how students are demonstrating lifelong learning. So in terms of school readiness, in the 23-24 school year, we saw lower levels of students meeting benchmarks in the spring than previous years, even though the rates were similar in the fall. In terms of students entering kindergarten with where we're entering kindergarten with similar rates of letter name recognition and similar rates of letter sound knowledge. However, by spring, we're seeing increased trends of students meeting benchmarks as they're leaving kindergarten. And then Michelle will talk about.
So I think just to remember that school readiness for Anoka-Hennepin, we're having all of our teachers trained in the letters, early childhood letters. We had 2 complete the training the first round, and we have 29 going through it at this time. So we're doing that to be in better alignment with our kindergarten and literacy. The continuation of our Heggerty's curriculum, which focuses on rhyming and alliteration for our preschoolers, I think will also be a good, it's really helping us try to get caught back up to where they enter kindergarten ready to take on the literacy there. And the pyramid model, MTSS, our behavior, our social emotional learning, I think that especially in school readiness, that's so very important that we have our kids ready to learn how to learn for preschool or for kindergarten. And so I think that that's where we're putting a lot of our focus for our kids, and that's having a positive impact.
As we move into elementary achievement, you'll hear me compare our performance to the state. As Joel mentioned in his presentation, Anoka-Hennepin mirrors the demographics of the state in many, many ways. So we are somewhat of a microcosm. So we compare our performance to statewide performance when it comes to things like, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments and those types of measures that we have statewide data. So in terms of this presentation, you'll notice that the math are in green tones, the reading are in purple tones, and the science are in orange tones, just to give you kind of a purview as you're looking at, so you'll know what subject you're looking at. The blue horizontal lines represent the state proficiency. So as you can see across these graphics, grades 3, 4, and 5, we are performing above the state in mathematics. We had a slight lower performance in 3rd grade, increased performance in 4th grade, slight lower in performance in 5th grade in mathematics. In the area of reading, our performance in 3rd grade was relatively flat. Again, we're performing above the state in all of these grade levels. We had, again, an uptick in 4th grade in reading performance and a slight decline in 5th grade. Relative to science, you'll see the district and state side by side now because it's just one grade level. It's only in 5th grade where science is assessed. And the district is performing above the state, but we in both district and state had a decline in science proficiency in this last year. We also look at how, kind of our relative performance to other districts across the state. So this tells you the percentile that the district is performing at. So I'll focus on the district elementary math, the 4th set of bars over. That tells us that we're at the past year, we lost a little bit of ground compared to all other districts in the state, but we're performing at the 69th percentile in the state, meaning that we're performing better in elementary mathematics overall than 69% of the districts across the state. Elementary reading, we're performing better than 64% of the districts, and in science, we're performing in the top half better than 54% of districts.
And providing more detail in relation to elementary achievement, in our response and what we're looking at in response to our student achievement data at the elementary level, we're focusing on a number of different strategies in relation to our student achievement. The first one that is noted here is the READ Act, which is new legislation implemented the spring as the start of the school year of 2023. So at the elementary level, we are in the 4th year of letters training. In May of 2024, we had our first cohort of teachers complete letters training, which was 508 staff. Currently, at the elementary level, we have 368 staff in letters training and 218 staff at the elementary level in OLA. And then we're in year 4 of focusing on school-wide English learners. In relation to math, we are in our 6th year of implementation of our math program, Bridges, and also in our 6th year of talent development and school within a school Nebula programming. And our talent development programming is offered to students in grades 3, 4, and 5 for those in relation to meeting the criteria for reading and math. And in that, we provide programming for students in grades 3, 4, and 5, reading and math, for Tier 2, Tier 3, and then our Nebula program, which is Tier 4. And then we continue to focus on our, on our academic and behavioral interventions in relation to meeting the needs for all of our learners through MTSS. Additionally, with our, it's not on this slide here, but also focusing on our science standards and our science student achievement. And so we are in year 2 of implementing our new science curriculum, Twig Science, which is aligned to our new science standards, supporting our students this spring with MCA 4s, with the new science MCA 4 testing. And then continuing, the last bullet is, we continue to implement our school-wide behavior plans across all elementary schools. Those are reviewed every year with the principal and the staff, and they are reviewed in the beginning part of the school year and then reviewed at the end of each trimester to look at any potential adjustments to meet the needs of our learners at each site.
As we move into middle school, again, we are outperforming the state across grade levels, and each grade level in mathematics at the middle school level increased slightly or maintained the same performance as the previous year. In reading, again, each grade level is performing above the state at the middle level, and each grade level has either increased their performance slightly over last year or maintained performance of last year. In science at the middle level, again, you'll see a side-by-side because science is only assessed in the 8th grade at the middle school. Our performance actually, outperformed the state in terms of the trends that we saw. We saw a much greater increase in science in 8th grade in Anoka-Hennepin than did the state. As we look at that same comparison compared to all other districts across the state, at the middle school, we are at or near the 70th percentile in all 3 subject areas.
At the middle level, we are committed to an effective multi-tiered systems of support to meet the academic, social, and behavioral needs of each student. Our school board strategic priority and the READ Act focuses our work on improving student literacy. Strategies that you'll find at the middle school include online language and literacy academy professional development, or OLA for teachers. We are in the 1st year of that. Our focused literacy coaching across content areas. So we do literacy coaching not only in ELA, but also science and social studies and other content areas. And we focus student intervention in the areas of literacy to improve literacy skills. The alignment of state standards in science is complete, and those new standards went into effect this fall. The district is prepared to take the science MCA 4s this spring when it is offered for the first time.
When we move to high school, at the high school level, again, you'll see these graphs are side by side because each subject is only assessed in 1 grade level. So at the high school level, the district and state both saw a slight decrease, but we are still slightly above the state. I mean, it looks like when rounding, they're both at 35% relative to math performance. The high school level, in terms of reading, we saw a slight increase in performance, where again, performing above the state. And in science, we maintained our performance where the state had a slight increase, but we are still performing at the same level as the state. In terms of the comparison to other districts, we're performing in the top half of districts statewide at the high school level with the 60th percentile in mathematics, the 54th percentile in reading, and the 57th percentile for science. In science, we're also going, or in high school rather, not in science, in high school rather, we're going to also look at students that their career and college course taking. When we look at this indicator, we look at seniors who have taken these kinds of courses across their high school career. Almost 80% of our 24 seniors took at least one potential college credit earning course while they were in high school, and almost 90% took at least 2 of these courses.
All right, specifically in high school, how we are approaching this is through the continued work, just like you've heard from elementary and middle school. High schools are really focused in on that multi-tiered systems of support, specifically really looking at the early warning MTSS indicators, which would be like credits, failing courses, attendance, and behavioral incidents, which allow us as a system to provide this early warning indicator to our staff about how can we help wrap around support for our students. So that's really exciting, the added feature that we're going to have this year as a system. We continue to leverage the math and literacy coach model. Thanks to those that have visited some of our schools, you've actually been able to visit the Innovation Center, Director Simon and Dr. Langenfeld as well. You were able to see the work that was going on, as well as co-chairs. Visiting our schools to see the professional development, how those teachers are getting pedagogy while at the same time getting help and support, whether it's through data analysis, instructional design, or lesson planning, which has been very helpful. In addition to that, we've also, thanks to you all, have visited our academic intervention teacher models and our behavioral models at a couple schools, and have been able to engage and see the work that's going on. Just yesterday I received, or actually today I received just a quick tidbit, Linda Hochman, you'd be appreciative to know 77% of our students over at Andover, big shout out, they are working through this AIT on the math intervention. 77% of those students have improved with the work that math team is doing. So kudos to you all if you're listening. And then in addition to what's going on in high schools, I know that a couple of you have joined some leadership development that we have going on in our schools, and you have seen our actual principals engaging in leadership development. I appreciate the time that you've gone out there, in addition to the OLA support that we have been providing, the professional development with our teachers to really focus in on literacy, as we know can be a huge gateway for many of our students and their experiences in school. So it really is exciting to know that kids from elementary all the way up to high school are receiving this focused attention on literacy through our adults and our staff, just getting stronger in the area of literacy and crossing it through contents. So that's what's going on right now in the high schools.
Our next area of focus is graduation indicators. When we talk about graduation indicators, just a quick reminder, there are 4 indicators actually that are counted toward graduation. We have the 4-year graduation rate, we have a dropout rate, we have a continuation rate, those students that maybe they didn't graduate in 4 years, but they continue on, they keep enrolled in our system toward diploma. And then there's what's called an unknown rate, where students that just leave our system, we're not sure where they went. So we'll highlight 3 of those areas. The state sets kind of a goal or a target for us of 90% 4-year graduation rate. And in this past year, we had a slight increase in our graduation rate to 86.7%, whereas our dropout rate still was very low, below 3% at 2.6%, below the state dropout rate. In terms of continuation rate, if we need a 90% graduation rate, or if that's what we're striving toward, then those other 3 indicators have to be below 10%. So we have, the fact that our continuation rate is declining a little bit is a good thing, because it says that more of our students are actually graduating in 4 years. So we had a 7.7% continuation rate. Students that didn't graduate stayed in our system, which matches the state rate in this past year. And graduation rates are a year behind. 2023 is our latest graduation data that we have from the state. Next indicator, not only, if we students don't graduate with us, and don't continue our system, certainly we work to serve students and adults in our community through our adult basic ed program as well. So we measure those kinds of indicators also, and student persistence are the students that stay in the program, similar to that kind of continuation. We also measure students that took a pre and a post test, giving us the information about making an educational gain. And then we look at those students that set a diploma or a GED as their goal and how many of those actually achieve their goal in that given year. And that's the data you see in front of you.
All right, back to me, it looks like. All right, with graduation, just to give you a quick rundown, if you recall, earlier last spring, we had our counselor group come out and talk with you all just about the work that's going on, specifically those 1-minute meetings, which don't sound like, wow, we could do that in a minute, but they met with every single student in our high schools. And then that's a huge task for them with the busyness of schools to really start identifying through the personalized learning plans, PLPs, that really talk about who am I, where am I going, and how do I get there. So through that work, we have our counselor team and staff that are really wrapping around students to really help them determine their college and career trajectory and what they want to do and their experience in high schools, which is really exciting. In addition, we've kind of touched on that, just developing support systems, so pairing that with our MTSS, early warning indicators, and our teams to really try to help and keep students on track. Within our buildings, we have student data reports that obviously indicate where students are to try to maintain and make sure that our students are on track. And if they're not, what can we do to wrap around to make sure that they are to help support our graduation rates? Earlier, I think it was in spring or maybe even fall, they all run together. But you had a presentation with regional, just on the intense work and the robust work that they do with tech and regional regarding credit recovery and the systemic efforts that we do to support our students in their progress. So again, just that work that they do, and we continue to refine that and say, how do we help improve our systems and our processes for our high school students? And then, of course, this collective impact, it's a team. How do we get everybody involved, really maximizing and leveraging all of our support that we have, ranging from our counselors, our social workers, Indian advisors, assistant principals, and really try to keep our students on track so that they can be successful in their college and career endeavors.
Next, we're moving into the area of achievement gap closure. And as we move to this area, I wanted just to show you this graphic. This scattergram tells a story why demographics are important. There's a strong correlation or relationship between the percentage of students in a district who qualify for free and reduced price services and the rate at which students reach proficiency, as you can see by kind of the tightness and the linear fashion of those dots, how they're grouped together. The orange dot represents Anoka-Hennepin School District, while the blue dots represent other districts located in the metro areas across the state. You can easily see that school districts with the lowest percentage of students qualifying for free and reduced price services have the highest math and reading proficiency rates. This becomes increasingly important as our free and reduced rates increase year to year. This graphic shows you the percent of students in each student group reaching proficiency rates, with Anoka-Hennepin in the dark green shade on the left side of the groupings and the state in the lighter green shade on the right side of the groupings. In all student groups in Anoka-Hennepin, we outperformed the state in 2024 in mathematics. You can see this, it depicts the gap, if you will, by the height of the dark bars compared to each other and the height of the light bars compared to each other. But we'll dig into that a little deeper as we go a couple more slides down the road. In the area of reading, all student groups outperformed their state counterparts in Anoka-Hennepin, with the exception of Asian students and students qualifying for special education services, who performed about the same as their state counterparts. In the area of math, or in science rather, all student groups performed above the state, with the exception of multiracial students who performed slightly lower than the state in this past year. As we look specifically at the areas aligned to achievement and integration, comparing free and reduced to non-free and reduced and students of color to white students, you can see the changes in what's depicted are the proficiency rates of each group. So even though the proficiency rates might change year to year, the gap in this case stayed similar to last year. In the area of reading, the gaps again stayed similar with a slight closure of gaps between students of color and white students in this past year, with students of color gaining proficiency rate where white students maintained their proficiency rate. In science, free and reduced compared to non-free and reduced students, the gap is slightly narrowed in this past year, while students of color and white student gap stayed about the same relative to science. When we look at the gap in terms of career and college course taking, again, our gaps have narrowed in both free and reduced, non-free and reduced, and students of color white. Now, I want to point out to you that the gap did narrow with free and reduced, non-free and reduced, but ideally, it doesn't narrow because one group, in this case, the non-free and reduced group decreased slightly. That's not the way we intend to close the gap. It did, that's why we look at the rates as well. It did close, but it's closed because one group increased, the other group decreased slightly. When we look at our graduation rates, the gaps stayed similar for four-year graduation rates in both free and reduced compared to non-free and reduced students, as well as students of color white students over the latest year of graduation data.
So as we look at the data that Jonna just reviewed, we know that in our district, excuse me, we are committed to creating equitable learning environments for all of our students and providing access and representation for all of them in meaningful and highly positive ways. That is a goal for us strategically. So with that, we're really focused on looking at student data to drive our improvement process and a success for all of our students through multi-tiered systems of support. In a number of our slides, you've heard us reference MTSS. And what is MTSS? MTSS, it really aligns to multi-tiered systems of support where Tier 1 instruction is provided for all students. Tier 2 is provided for strategic interventions for some students, and in MTSS 3, Tier 3, it's providing an intensive intervention for a few students. So we look at MTSS through that lens for both instruction and assessment, student engagement, school climate, and student behavior and mental health. An example that I can think of, which I referenced earlier, and my colleagues have as well, with the READ Act, we're looking at that through the process of professional development for our staff. And another example at the elementary level is looking at our curriculum in alignment to standards to improve our student success. Additionally, with this, we look at an equitable education for all students. And in looking at some of the processes with that, another one is strengthening our recruitment and retention efforts with a diverse pool of candidates, and also looking at securing grants to support recruitment and retention of staff.
As we finish up our presentation here, we have just a few more slides to go. You can breathe a little easier. Similar to the district picture, there's a strong relationship between the percent of students in a school who qualify for free and reduced price services and the rate at which these students reach proficiency as well. Ideally, we want to see the dots, the orange dots again represent Anoka-Hennepin schools. The blue dots represent schools across metro areas across the state. We're looking at math right now. Ideally, we want to see, as you think about that kind of line grouping of dots there, we want to see the orange dots on the top right of those groupings, which say, certainly we heard a lot that free and reduced is a strong predictor of proficiency, and that is absolutely true. However, there are many of our schools that are beating the odds, if you will, compared to their economic peers. And that's what you can, that's when schools are at the top right of those groupings, those are the schools that are beating the odds. And we'll look more specifically about, at those schools in just a moment, or the numbers of those schools. When we look at reading, you can see that we don't have as many schools on the top right of these plots as we did in math, which maybe aptly, so we're focusing on literacy across our schools. So when we look at the number of Anoka-Hennepin schools that are outperforming their peers, beating the odds, if you will, comparing overall performance of similar schools based on percentage of students qualifying for free and reduced price services, and looking at the schools that are performing in the top quarter of their economic peer groups, so the top quartile, the top fourth of their group, if you will. At the elementary level, we have 13 schools in the top of their peer groups, middle school 4, high school 1 in the area of math. And actually there were 4 schools at the elementary, 1 school at the middle school level that was actually in the very top spot of their economic peer group for mathematics. You can see how those numbers relate. And again, you can see not only pictorially in the scatter plots, but also we have fewer schools in that top quartile in reading across the elementary, middle, and high school. But we have 6 schools that were in the top for both at the elementary level, and 2 schools at the middle school that were in the top for both subject areas. So as we consider these things, Anoka-Hennepin schools outperform their peer groups across the economic spectrum. It's not just schools that have low free and reduced price services or schools that have high free and reduced price services. We see our schools outperforming their peers across the economic spectrum. Nearly 2/3 of our schools are beating the odds when we look at similar schools across the state in at least one of the subject areas, and almost 90% of those schools were also in that top quartile in the previous year. Nearly every one of our schools have outperformed their comparable economic peers in at least one subject across the time that we've been looking at these data. And Anoka-Hennepin schools outperform their peer groups, as you saw, not only in this past year at higher rates in math, but that is true across time than in reading. For the 2 years now, thank you, Director Simon, you prompted us to look more deeply at the student groups. We used to only look at these data in terms of all students, based on questions from Director Simon. We looked at this from the last year for the first time across student groups. And when we looked at our schools compared to their peer schools, economic peer schools, relative to student groups, that are, again, similar comparisons in that top quartile of their schools, Anoka-Hennepin schools outperform their economic peers at even higher rates than looking at just all students. This table demonstrates the number of schools with at least one student group in the top quarter of their peers. You can see those rates are higher across our elementary, middle, and high schools for math and reading, considering student group performance, with many, many of them, 14 at the elementary, 5 at the middle school, and 2 at the high school, that were in the top quartile for at least one student group in both subjects. So considering these data, over 90% of our schools beat the odds, outperforming their economic peers in at least one of the examined student group areas. Nearly 80% of them performed in the top quarter of their economic peer group across multiple student groups in any of the subjects. Nearly 80% performed in the top quarter of their economic peer groups in multiple subjects in any of the student groups. Over 40% of them led their economic peer group in at least one of the student groups, and 1/4 of Anoka-Hennepin schools led their economic peer groups in more than one subject area, more than one student group or subject area. So with that, we will sit for questions or comments.
Co-Chair DeShane?
Thank you. Just a really quick comment. Thank you so much for all the work that went into this. I know, as you said, it was a collaborative effort. A lot of different data points and perspectives across kind of the spectrum of our learners, from pre-K all the way back to adult basic education learners and everything in between. So really appreciate all that work. And I think, there's a lot to feel positively about. We've seen some increased proficiency levels, large increases in our kindergarten skills from fall to spring, and some outperformance of state averages. And of course, obviously, there's still room to grow and increase achievement across these measurements. I think we have had a continued focus on this board of reducing the achievement gaps, and we're continuing to prioritize student achievement. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, with all this success, I think it's so important to see the different data sets. We know the MCA test is a point in time. Therefore, seeing these different data points across time and across different measurement tools really tells kind of a full story of what's happening in each of our buildings. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I look forward to all of our work together to continue watching those scores climb higher.
Any other thoughts or comments from board members? Director Langenfeld?
I too want to echo my appreciation for the presentation, but equally, if not more important, is all the hard work behind the scenes. When you've had the privilege to be in a number of schools and see these programs in action, and to see how these interventions are being implemented, and the extraordinary staff and the amount of professional development that's gone on. I mean, Mary, you provided some incredibly large numbers of staff being trained in letters, and the district is leading the state in that area as well, and I know we'll see some even greater dividends in student achievement, and we should really be paying attention to that, since that's one of our top priorities as a board, too, around literacy. I think the other piece that is quiet but a really vitally important part of the presentation that really contributes to the success of students is really that whole model and implementation of the multi-tiered systems of support. It's not something that people see or hear a lot about, but there were many, many years where we did not have this approach, and to really identify it in the way that it's scaled out and affords each child what they need in a timely fashion. That is a really, really important part of the success of what we're seeing when you talk about schools beating the odds, because as it was explained to us just even today by a principal, the significance of sometimes how far apart children are in terms of their skill sets when they come in the doors, and how to bridge that, to get that student up where they need, and we need them to be in terms of their proficiency, takes resource support and time and skill. It's will and skill as well. So a shout out to all of the staff who have been working so hard, both in our classroom settings and interventions, and the thoughtfulness that's gone in. As our population changes and our children's needs shift as well, which we've seen to really recognize that you're doing extraordinary work to ensure that every child has what they need for success. And you can see that when you start looking at graduation. So it's all the way through and to adult basic ed as well. So thanks.
Any other thoughts or comments from board members? All right, if nobody else has anything, I would like to throw something out there. First of all, thank you guys very much. Thank you for the presentation and for putting all of this together. It's very helpful to just have a better understanding of just what's going on in the district and how we're measuring up, so to speak. One of the great difficulties with the MCA test is it is a very polarizing just test. It's a very polarizing metric. There's very strong opinions on it, and rightly so. It is certainly not a perfect test, but it is a test, and we use it, and we just spent a lot of time talking about it, using it as a metric of comparison and understanding. So I have done, as a board member, my due diligence. I've made my very best effort to understand that test as much as possible so I can just give my feedback to the public. And I even actually went so far as to just take the equivalent of the MCA test, the 11th grade math test myself, because you can load questions online from previous years. They won't give it to you from this year, but from previous years. So, because the best way to learn about something is to just get your hands dirty, so to speak. So that's what I did. And just to give a really quick recap, I went and I took the 11th grade math MCA test. I believe it was from 2 years ago. There were a total of 48 questions I could download and take. I wrote all my answers down to make sure I wasn't deceiving myself into thinking I got one right or wrong when I may not have. So I would write my answer down and then check the answer. It took me approximately around 66 minutes to complete the test. I got a score of 44 out of 48, which is around 91%. That's passing by any metric. And just quick, because it's worth mentioning, the reason I got 4 questions wrong fall into 3 categories. Number one is I misunderstood a question. Second one was, as anyone who's done math will know, if you do a long calculation, sometimes you just do bad math, even if you know what you're doing. That happened to me. And then there are 2 questions I simply forgot a detail of the subject matter, so I got it wrong, which that's kind of what it's testing, right? Do you know how to do this? So the reason I mention that is because those are all going to be common reasons students or really anybody misses questions on the MCA test. So what happened to me, I think, would be very common for any student taking the test. And I really did this. The reason I went out of my way to do this is to just speak to it in a very specific sense, because at a previous work session, we discussed the MCA test, and it was made apparent to us that the presentation of the results of the MCA test are confusing at best. It is not, for the sake of the public, it is not the way you'd think of a normal test. You don't just get a simple percentage based on how many you got correct and incorrect, and then it's not like a very easy to understand scale like that. I mean, there is a scale they use, it's just not that straightforward. So that adds a level of confusion to it. That, I would say, is the first and one of the biggest flaws to the test. The second and biggest flaw to the test, in my opinion, is the fact that it is not tied to anything that incentivizes students to care, as painful as it is to admit that out loud. If anyone, an adult or a student, goes into a test knowing that no matter how they do it has no impact on them, you know, we're all going to do what people do, and generally, on average, we're probably going to take the path of least resistance. So I think that really works against the credibility of the test, unfortunately. But despite acknowledging both of those 2 things as, in my opinion, the biggest concerns, having taken the test, and as someone who knows math very well, my degree, my profession, use math heavily, I would still say it's a good test. When I took the test, simply stated, if you know how to do what the questions are asking, you should, well, if you know the math that we're teaching you and the standards that you are supposed to have learned at that time, you should be able to answer those questions. That's what I'm trying to say. So, as much as frustrating as the confusion around the test might be, I still do think it is a good metric. And all of that leads into kind of, you know, I'm kind of speaking specifically, because this is the one I understand, to 11th grade math. Well, I mean, I understand all of them to a certain point, but that's just the one I chose to do a deep dive into. And while it is great to see improvement in certain areas, and it is good to have a comparison with the rest of the state, because it's good to kind of know where we are on, like, in comparison to everybody else. It is good to have essentially a bottom line, so to speak, just a single metric we can point to and say yes or no. This is how we know what we're doing. And let's just say for the high school 11th grade math, unfortunately, we've seen a decline over the last many years in our district and really statewide. And I'm just hoping that we can turn the ship around. I'm hoping that we can find a way to improve the MCA score, not because the MCA score matters in and of itself, but because it is an indicator of if students are in fact learning the benchmarks and the standards that we are teaching them. So that's my take on the MCA. I'm trying to make it as clear as possible for the public, because admittedly there's confusion and strong opinions around it. So that's my quick take. And yeah, those are all my comments. Are there any other thoughts or comments from board members? All right, well, thank you everybody for the presentations. Next on our list, we are moving to item 8A, labor relations, for 2024 to 25 paraeducators master agreement. Welcome, Dr. Jennifer Cherry, Executive Director of Human Resources.
Good evening, co-chairs Arco and DeShane, members of the board, Superintendent McIntyre. I'm here this evening and I'm pleased to announce that our paraeducators, who are represented by Anoka-Hennepin Paraeducators Association, have ratified a new 2-year agreement with the dates of July 1, 2024 through June 30th of 2026. Thank you to the members of the employee groups and the district bargaining teams for their work in negotiating an updated employment contract. The tentative agreement reached includes a salary increase that includes a market adjustment to raise the starting wages, with every employee receiving at least a 5% increase during the 2-year agreement. Starting wages now include for our bus paras, $18 per hour. Our elementary and secondary paras will now start at $18.75. Our special education paras will now start at $19.60, and those special education paras that are working in setting 3, an additional 50 cents, and our special education paraprofessionals working in setting 4, an additional $1 per hour. In addition to that, our LPNs, our health paraprofessionals, will start at $25.20 per hour. All of these increases are important for us to remain competitive, and so this is a great agreement for both parties. The agreement also includes step movement both years of the contract and an increase to the district contribution toward benefits of 5% for singles and 10% for family benefit holders in year 1, and a 5% increase for all benefit holders in the second year of the contract. The total compensation package includes an 11% increase, or $4.5 million in new money. The total contract equals $88.2 million over the course of the 2 years. This proposed agreement is within the authority provided by the school board, and as a result, I'm seeking approval of the contract as presented.
Thank you very much. Board members, are there any questions for Dr. Cherry? All right, if not, before us is approval for the 2024-25 Paraeducators Master Agreement as presented in Appendix P. Hearing no request for discussions, I would entertain a motion to approve the 24-25 Paraeducators Master Agreement as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Director Simon. Is there a second? Thank you, Director Langenfeld. Well, all those in favor, oh, my apologies. Is there any discussion? Oh. Will all those in favor say aye? Aye. All opposed say nay. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, the motion is approved. And that brings us to our next item, which is item 8B, the 24-25 Education Office Professionals Master Agreement. Welcome again, Dr. Cherry.
Thank you, Chair Arco. Again, I'm pleased to announce that we have another tentative agreement this evening. This is listed in Appendix Q in your packet, and I'm pleased to announce that our education office professionals, who are represented by the Anoka-Hennepin Education Office Professionals Association, have ratified a new 2-year agreement with the effective dates July 1, 2024 through June 30th of 2026. Thank you to the members of the employee and the district bargaining teams for their work in negotiating an updated employment contract. The tentative agreement reached includes reducing the number of steps on the schedule from 10 steps to 6 steps, and changing the longevity stipends starting at 11 years now instead of 15. Avoiding the overlap between the steps on the schedule and the longevity pay supports pay transparency and fairness amongst our employees. The targeted increases to the salary schedule were made where needed to meet market median rates, and all employees received between a 5% and a 20% increase to their salaries over the 2 years of the contract. The starting pay for entry-level secretaries increases from $17.10 to $19.05 per hour. The agreement includes step movement each year of the contract, and employees who were not scheduled for step movement or improvement to their longevity pay either year of the contract received a one-time payment of $500 upon ratification, or I'm sorry, upon authorization. The agreement also includes a district insurance contribution increase of 5% for singles, and 10% for families in year 1 of the contract, and 5% for all insurance benefit holders in year 2. And finally, it removes the wait time and the lifetime cap for district contributions to the 403B. This allows employees to start receiving this benefit upon hire, which is a great resource and tool for our entry-level employees and a great recruitment tool for us. The total cost of the agreement is $26.5 million. This is a $1.6 million change, and it is equivalent to a 13.6% package over the course of the 2 years. The proposed agreement is within the authority provided by the school board, and as a result, I am seeking approval of the contract as presented.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from board members? All right, hearing no request for discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve the 24-25 Education Office Professionals Master Agreement as presented. Thank you, Co-Chair DeShane. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Simon. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, will all in favor please say aye? Aye. All opposed say nay. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Board. I just have one other comment. That was the last open contract at this time. So at this time, all of your contracts are settled. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we are nearing our last board agenda item. We are at item 9, board correspondence and communication. Members, this is your opportunity to share happenings in your community, report on committee assignments, or other items of interest. Does anyone have anything to share? Co-Chair DeShane?
I'll go quick because I know we're getting late. I was able to visit Champlin Brooklyn Park Academy, joined by Director Langenfeld, and we were able to view the partnership that they have with the Three Rivers Park program, which provides opportunities for students to have hands-on science learning activities, among other really cool, exciting things happening at the school. It was a very productive and happy visit. Dayton Elementary had their fall festival this weekend. I was able to swing by and I saw so many happy students and families enjoying their time together. It's an example of work that our parent-teacher organizations put on for our school communities. So just a huge shout out and thank you to all of those involved in our parent-teacher organizations for the opportunities that you provide for our students. And at Jackson, they had their fall dance, and I've enjoyed chaperoning the fall dance the last several years. This year was another delightful experience spent with our middle school students and the amazing staff volunteers that make a fun and engaging opportunity for students to just have fun with each other. So thank you to all that make those exciting opportunities possible.
Director Langenfeld?
Thank you. I was able to attend the anti-crime breakfast, which is just an incredible collaboration, and I know some of you probably have attended in the past. A lot of the team went from the cabinet, and that was a really important group of people coming together for the safety and well-being of our community, and the data was there to support the work that's underway. So a really nice way to start the day, too, with all good, some very important good news. The other thing that I know Co-Chair Arco and I did attend on behalf of the board is the Community Curriculum Advisory Committee looking at the social emotional learning curriculum. And it was very well attended by representation from all of our schools. There are family, parents who sit on that committee just to talk about the questions and surveys that are going to go out. We spent some time just understanding the work that was going on in our schools, heard some very positive feedback about the various programs. So underway now, we gave feedback on the survey format for both teachers and for families. And they anticipate those will go out probably, if you recall, was it second week in November, I think. So those surveys should be coming back to us to give us feedback. And I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I attended, and we're kind of just kicking off the process to reevaluate the SEL curriculum. So it was good to get community feedback. And yeah, I look forward to just seeing how the process unfolds.
Mm-hmm. Then as another opportunity, I did attend the curriculum night. Again, the U.S. History 10 was there, well represented by the vendors, but also had an opportunity, and I know some have been sitting on the ELA committee, to look at the curriculum again in terms of CKLA and Bridge to Read and Wit and Wisdom, and they're all being piloted now. So a lot of good feedback in terms of the results that people are seeing, and today Co-Chair Duchesne and I, along with the superintendent, visited Oxbow, and there was reference to the implementation of those particular programs as well. Had a chance to check out the Safety Secure Office now in the front area of Champlain Park High School, which was pretty grand, and Co-Chair Duchesne and I attended that and got a real good look at. They were just bringing all the furniture in last week, so it was very exciting as well. Lots of great work going on in our schools, and I encourage everyone to really recognize the extraordinary hard work going on to be able to ensure that every child has what they need for success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from board members? All right, hearing none, we will move to our last item, item 10. It will be conducted in closed executive session. The first closed session will be a closed session pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.03 to discuss negotiation strategies for the following bargaining groups: building supervisors, building service employees, child nutrition site supervisors, community school coordinators, education office professionals, education support professionals, paraeducators, principals, school officers, supervisors, special education program supervisors, and technical specialists. The second closed session will be closed pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05 subdivision 2B for preliminary consideration of allegations or charges against an individual subject to its authority. The closed session will be held in the Michael Sullivan Room. I would entertain a motion to move to closed session for the reasons just stated. So moved. Thank you, Director Simon. Is there a second? Thank you, Director Audette. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. With 6 in favor and 0 opposed, we will move to executive session in the Michael Sullivan Room. Do we want to take a 5-minute break? All right, we'll do a 5-minute break. The meeting is recessed at 9:55.